The sun beat down on Arizona's red earth like God's own judgment, harsh and unforgiving. Miles Hawkins knelt beside a solitary grave atop a barren hill, his weathered fingers placing a wild desert flower on the sun-bleached wooden marker. The inscription had faded under years of punishing elements, but Miles knew every letter by heart. Gabriel Sullivan, 1840 to 1865. He touched the silver ring hanging from a chain around his neck, his calloused thumb tracing the simple engraving inside. A promise made in another lifetime. The distant sounds of commotion from Broken Mesa reached him even here, half a mile away. Shouts, excitement, the unmistakable collective roar of men gathered to watch death. Miles turned toward the noise. At the edge of town, a crowd had formed beneath the old, hanging tree. A Native American man stood on the back of a wagon, hands bound, a noose already around his neck. Miles watched, his face impassive as stone. The wagon jerked forward. The body dropped, then swung. He simply turned and walked away. 4 days later, the Arizona sun had not relented. It cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Broken Mesa as Miles Hawkins rode back into town. He sat tall in the saddle despite the exhaustion etched in the lines of his face. Behind him, the body of Johnny Snake Eyes Martinez was draped across a second horse, bound and bloody. People stepped out of businesses and homes to watch. The infamous Sheriff Hawkins, the man whose cold justice was as reliable as the sunrise, had returned with his prey. Miles had tracked Martinez for 6 days through Apache territory, following a trail gone cold more times than he cared to count. 6 days of sparse water, little sleep, in the company of memories he couldn't outrun. Martinez had killed 3 ranchers, stolen their cattle, and vanished into the red cliffs like a ghost. But even ghosts left traces if you knew how to look. The sheriff's gray eyes scanned the gathered faces with detached calculation. A deep scar ran from his right ear down his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. A souvenir from another manhunt years ago. His skin was tanned to leather from years under the desert sun, his once dark hair now salted with gray at the temples. At 45, Miles Hawkins looked a decade older, worn down by years of violence and solitude. "Brought back another one, Sheriff?" called a voice from the crowd. Miles didn't respond. Words were currency he rarely spent without necessity. Victor Blackwood emerged from his trading post, brushing non-existent dust from his tailored suit. Unlike most in Broken Mesa, Blackwood maintained the appearance of Eastern refinement, as if daring the desert to soil his polished boots. He owned half the businesses in town, including the saloon, the hotel, and the stage line. His carefully trimmed beard framed a smile that never reached his eyes. "Sheriff Hawkins," Blackwood announced, projecting his voice for the gathered crowd. "Once again, you've proven your worth to our fine community." He approached with the confident stride of a man who believed the ground beneath his feet was his personal property. "I believe you've earned yourself a reward." Miles dismounted, pulling Martinez's body unceremoniously from the horse. The outlaw groaned, still alive despite the beating he'd taken during capture. "Just doing my job," Miles replied, his voice a graveled whisper from disuse. "Lock him up. I'll write up the report in the morning." Of course," Blackwood nodded to 2 men who moved forward to take Martinez. "But I insist on showing my personal appreciation. Come, I have something special for you." Miles followed Blackwood, not out of interest, but from the mechanical obligation of his position. They walked to the back of the trading post, where a small storage shed stood apart from the main building. Inside, 2 women sat on the dirt floor. Their hands were bound with rope, their dark eyes reflecting defiance rather than fear. Sisters, Miles could tell immediately, though one was slightly older than the other. Both wore traditional Apache clothing, now dirty and torn. The older one met Miles's gaze directly, her chin lifted in silent challenge. "Found them with a trading caravan passing through," Blackwood explained, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "The leader said they had been causing trouble. Offered them to me for a fair price." He chuckled. "They're yours, Sheriff. No one claimed them, so now they belong to you." Miles studied the women. The older one, perhaps 27, had high cheekbones and eyes that missed nothing. Her sister appeared younger, maybe 22, with a gentler countenance but the same unwavering dignity. What are their names? Miles asked, his voice betraying no emotion. Blackwood shrugged. The older one's called Naya, I think. The younger is Lily. Does it matter? He placed a hand on Miles's shoulder. They'll keep you from being lonely out at that cabin of yours. You've earned some comfort. Miles's hand moved to the knife at his belt. Several men watching tensed, anticipating violence. Instead, he knelt beside the women and cut through their bindings with a single, precise slice. They don't belong to anyone, Miles said, standing and returning the knife to its sheath. Neither do I. Blackwood's face flushed with anger. Now see here, Hawkins. We done here? Miles interrupted, already turning to leave. You're making a mistake, Blackwood called after him. These savages need a firm hand, and you're throwing away a generous gift. Miles didn't respond. He walked back to his horse, mounted, and rode out of town without looking back. The townspeople watched in confused silence. Sheriff Hawkins had always been an odd one, remote and solitary, but this was unexpected, even for him. What no one in Broken Mesa saw was the barely perceptible tremor in Miles's hand as he gripped the reins, the tightness around his eyes that spoke of memories threatening to surface. Memories of another time when human beings were treated as property, when the worth of a soul was measured by the color of skin. Miles rode the familiar trail to his cabin, 2 miles outside of town. The structure stood alone against the backdrop of red mesas and endless asylum, a testament to isolation deliberately chosen. Built of rough-hewn pine and stone, the cabin had withstood years of punishing sun and howling winter winds. A small barn stood nearby, housing his second horse and a few chickens. A hand-dug well provided precious water, its windmill creaking in the afternoon breeze. He unsaddled his horse, rubbed the animal down, and gave it fresh water and feed. The routine tasks anchored him, keeping his mind from drifting to places he preferred not to visit. Inside, the cabin was spare but orderly. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. A narrow bed occupied another corner, beside a table covered with maps, wanted posters, and a leather-bound journal. A shelf held a few books, medical texts mostly, though their spines were worn from years without use. Miles lit a lamp and poured himself a measure of whiskey, downing it in one swallow. The liquor burned a familiar path down his throat. He poured a second, then paused, noticing movement outside his window. They stood near the fence like apparitions, Naya and Lily, the Apache sisters he'd cut free. Neither spoke nor approached. They simply stood, watching the cabin with a patience born of necessity. Miles cursed under his breath. He hadn't expected them to follow him. What had they been thinking? Broken Mesa was safer than the open desert, even with men like Blackwood. At least in town, they might have found work, shelter. He closed the curtain and tried to ignore their presence. He made coffee, cleaned his guns with methodical precision, wrote in his journal using a cipher he'd developed years ago. All the while, he felt their presence like a persistent itch beneath his skin. As darkness fell, Miles glanced outside again. The sisters had moved closer to the barn, huddled together against the cooling night air. Lily leaned against her sister, eyes closed in exhaustion. Miles sighed, a sound like wind through dead branches. He took a plate of beans and dried beef, set it on the porch step, and quickly retreated inside. He watched through a crack in the curtains as Naya approached cautiously, took the plate, and returned to her sister's side. That night, Miles dreamed of Gabriel. It was always the same dream. The field hospital overflowing with wounded from both sides. The smell of blood and gangrene thick in the humid Virginia air. Gabriel working tirelessly beside him, their hands moving with practiced precision as they fought to save lives while their own countrymen tore each other apart outside. Gabriel's voice steady despite exhaustion. We took an oath, Miles, to all mankind. Then the dream shifted, as it always did. Colonel Harrington's men dragging Gabriel away. The accusation, traitor, the sound of a gunshot. Miles woke with Gabriel's name on his lips, sweat soaking his shirt despite the cool night air. He rose and moved to the window. The sisters still huddled by his barn, now wrapped in an old blanket he'd left hanging on the fence. In the silver moonlight, they looked like sculptures carved from shadow. Miles turned away, troubled by their presence in a way he couldn't articulate. He'd spent 20 years building walls around himself. These 2 women, with their silent dignity and uncomfortable gratitude, threatened those walls merely by existing. Morning brought clarity, as it often did. Miles would ride into town, speak to the missionary woman about finding proper arrangements for the sisters. They weren't his responsibility. He'd done his part by freeing them. What happened next was not his concern. But when he stepped outside at dawn, Lily was gathering eggs from the chicken coop, moving with quiet efficiency. Naya had drawn water from the well and was tending a small fire, where a pot of coffee brewed. Neither spoke nor asked permission. They simply worked, making themselves useful in a world that had tried to reduce them to possessions. Miles watched, conflict etched in the lines of his face. He'd lived alone for so long that the sight of others moving through his space felt like an invasion. Yet there was something almost familiar in their quiet industry, reminiscent of the field hospital routines he'd once known. "You don't have to do this," he said finally, his voice rough from disuse. Naya looked up, her dark eyes assessing him. "We pay our debts," she replied in accented but clear English. "You don't owe me anything." "You cut our ropes," Lily said softly, approaching with gathered eggs. Others would have accepted the gift. The word gift hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Miles felt a surge of anger, not at the sisters, but at Blackwood, at the casual cruelty of a world that would treat human beings as commodities. "There are missions in town," he said. "People who could help you better than I can." "We know what happens to Apache women in white towns," Naya replied, her voice flat. "We stay here until it's safe to find our people." Miles wanted to argue but found he had no counter. He knew she was right. Two Native women alone would face dangers in Broken Mesa that he, with his badge and reputation, could scarcely imagine. He nodded once, accepting the arrangement without enthusiasm. "Stay if you must. There's work to be done if you're staying." Thus began their strange coexistence. No promises were made, no terms discussed. Yet a rhythm emerged in the days that followed. Miles would leave food, they would take it. They would gather eggs, tend the garden, draw water. He would provide tools and materials for repairs they undertook without being asked. They didn't enter his cabin, respecting his private space as carefully as he respected theirs. At night, they slept in the barn, which Miles noted they had cleaned and organized with impressive efficiency. During the day, they moved around the property like shadows, present but unobtrusive. 3 days passed in this manner. Miles spent most of his time away from the cabin, patrolling the area or handling business in town. In truth, he was avoiding the discomfort of their presence, the way it stirred questions he'd rather leave unasked. On the fourth evening, Miles returned to find Naya being attacked by a cougar near the edge of his property. She had ventured too far gathering firewood, and the predator had seized its opportunity. Without hesitation, Miles drew his revolver and fired a warning shot, scaring the big cat away before it could do serious harm. Naya had suffered a deep gash on her arm. Miles led her back to the cabin, his mind automatically assessing the wound with a doctor's precision. Deep but clean, no sign of arterial damage. "Sit," he instructed, gesturing to a chair near the fireplace. It was the first time either sister had entered his cabin. Naya obeyed, her face betraying no pain, though Miles knew the wound must be agonizing. Lily hovered nearby, eyes wide with concern. Miles retrieved a wooden box from beneath his bed, a medical kit he hadn't opened in years. His hands moved with remembered precision as he cleaned and examined the wound. "You'll need stitches," he said, his voice clinical and detached. Naya nodded, watching as he threaded a needle and prepared the area. "You know medicine," she observed. Miles didn't respond. He worked methodically, his fingers remembering skills his mind had tried to forget. The stitches were small and even, minimizing scarring, a surgeon's touch. As he bandaged the wound, Naya's eyes fell on the contents of the medical kit, instruments far more sophisticated than a frontier sheriff would typically possess. "You were a doctor," she said, not a question. Miles stilled, then continued wrapping the bandage. "Once," he admitted, "long ago." "Why did you stop?" Miles secured the bandage and began packing away his supplies. "Because I learned my hands are better at killing than healing." He closed the kit with a decisive snap. "The wound needs to be kept clean. Change the bandage daily." Naya didn't move, her dark eyes studying him with uncomfortable perception. "A healer who became a killer," she said softly. "There is a story there." "There's always a story," Miles replied, suddenly weary. "Doesn't mean it needs telling." Later that night, unable to sleep, Miles sat at his table writing in his journal. The cipher had become second nature over the years, a necessary precaution for the dangerous truths contained within. He documented his progress in locating the men responsible for Gabriel's death. 20 years of hunting, and his list had grown short. Only a few names remained unmarked. Chief among them, Colonel Reed Harrington, now Governor Harrington of the neighboring state. The silver ring on its chain caught the lamplight as Miles leaned forward. He closed his hand around it, feeling the cool metal warm against his palm. Another year, perhaps less, and his mission would be complete. Justice or vengeance, he no longer distinguished between the two, would be served. A sound outside drew his attention. Miles extinguished the lamp and moved to the window. Naya stood by the well, her face tilted up to the stars, mouth moving in what appeared to be a prayer or song. The bandage on her arm gleamed white in the moonlight. Something in her solitary vigil reminded Miles of himself, another soul carrying burdens invisible to the casual observer. He turned away, troubled by the unwelcome empathy. The next morning, a new development. As Miles prepared to ride into town, he found Lily standing near his horse, a small wooden carving in her hands, a bird in flight, beautifully rendered despite the simple tools available. "For you," she said, offering the carving, "for helping my sister." Miles hesitated, then accepted the gift with awkward grace. "It's fine work." Lily smiled, the first time he'd seen either sister do so. "Our father taught us. He was known for his carvings among our people." "Where is he now?" The smile faded. "Dead. All our family is dead. Soldiers came to our camp 3 summers ago. Only Naya and I survived." Miles nodded, unsurprised by the familiar tale of loss. "I'm sorry." "It is the way of your people," Lily replied without bitterness, just a statement of fact that cut deeper than accusation. Miles mounted his horse, the carving tucked carefully in his pocket. "I'll be back by nightfall." In town, Miles handled his official duties with characteristic efficiency. He filed his report on Martinez, inspected the jail where the outlaw awaited transport to the territorial prison, and restocked supplies. All the while, he felt Blackwood's eyes on him, watching from the saloon window, from the steps of the hotel, calculating and cold. As Miles loaded supplies onto his horse, Blackwood finally approached, 2 men flanking him like faithful hounds. "Sheriff," he called, his tone falsely cordial. "A word, if you please." Miles turned, his face impassive. "Make it quick, Blackwood. I've got ground to cover." "Of course, always the dedicated lawman." Blackwood smiled thinly. "I couldn't help but notice those Apache women have taken up residence at your place." "What of it?" "Well, there's talk in town. People wondering about your sympathies." Miles straightened to his full height, a head taller than Blackwood. "Spit it out or walk away." Blackwood's facade of civility slipped momentarily, revealing the hardness beneath. "Fine. Those savages are trouble. They were caught stealing from the trading caravan. I paid good money to keep them from being killed outright." "Is that right?" Miles's voice was dangerously quiet. "It is. And now they've manipulated their way onto your property. God knows what they're planning." "Seems to me," Miles replied slowly, "they're planning on surviving in a world that's given them damn few options." Blackwood stepped closer, dropping his voice. "Listen carefully, Hawkins. Broken Mesa is growing. Progress is coming, whether you like it or not. The railroad's looking to expand through this territory." He gestured around the dusty town. "This will all be different in a year. Those who stand with progress will prosper. Those who don't," he shrugged, "well, change has casualties." "That a threat, Blackwood?" "A reality check. Governor Harrington himself is visiting next month to discuss development plans. Important people are taking interest in our little town." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "People remember whose side you were on when it mattered." The name sent a jolt through Miles, though his expression remained unchanged. Governor Reed Harrington, the man he'd been hunting for 2 decades, the architect of Gabriel's death, suddenly within reach. "I'm not on any side," Miles replied evenly. "Just uphold the law." "The law changes, Sheriff. Make sure you change with it." Blackwood turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and I'd keep a close eye on those Apache women if I were you. Savages have savage ways." Miles watched him go, mind racing beneath his calm exterior. Harrington coming to Broken Mesa, after 20 years of careful tracking, of moving closer in methodical increments. His target was walking into his territory. It seemed too perfect, almost like a trap. The ride back to the cabin gave Miles time to think. He'd need to be careful, to plan meticulously. Harrington would be surrounded by guards, protected by his position. A direct approach would be suicide. Lost in thought, Miles almost missed the fresh tracks crossing the trail to his cabin. 3 horses moving at a leisurely pace. His hand dropped to his revolver as he urged his mount forward. He found 3 riders at his property, ranch hands from the double bar spread north of town. They sat on horseback near the well, where Naya stood with a bucket of water, her posture rigid with tension. Lily was nowhere in sight. "Afternoon, boys," Miles called, his voice deceptively casual as he approached. "Something I can help you with?" The riders turned, surprise registering on their faces at his arrival. The leader, a broad-shouldered man named Hank, recovered quickly. "Sheriff Hawkins," he nodded. "Just stopped for some water. Long ride back to the ranch. And to meet your new housekeepers," added another rider with a smirk. "Heard in town you'd taken in some Apache squaws." Miles dismounted slowly, his eyes never leaving the men. "Water's free to travelers, but you've had your fill, I think." "No harm intended, Sheriff," Hank said, raising his hands in mock surrender. "Just making conversation with the lady here." Naya's face was expressionless, but Miles noted how she gripped the water bucket, knuckles white, ready to use it as a weapon if necessary. "Conversation's over," Miles stated flatly. "Move along." The third rider, younger than the others, leaned forward in his saddle. "Say, Sheriff, if you're done with these squaws, maybe you could loan them out. Been a long time since, Miles moved with explosive speed, grabbing the young man's shirt and yanking him from the saddle. The rider hit the ground hard, the air rushing from his lungs in a pained gasp. In one fluid motion, Miles drew his revolver and leveled it at the other 2. "Get him up and get off my property, now!" Hank's face flushed with anger. "You're choosing them over your own kind?" "My kind doesn't treat women as property," Miles replied, his voice cold as January steel. "Leave, don't come back." The riders helped their fallen companion to his feet and mounted up, throwing dark glances at Miles as they departed. The threat in their eyes was clear. This wasn't over. After they'd gone, Miles holstered his weapon and turned to Naya. "You all right?" She nodded, her expression guarded. "Lily is hiding. I told her to run when I saw them coming." "Smart," Miles acknowledged. "But this will happen again. Word's out about you 2. "We can leave," Naya said, though her eyes betrayed reluctance. Miles considered it. The logical course would be to send them away, remove the complication from his life, especially with Harrington's visit approaching. He needed to focus, to plan carefully for the moment he'd been working toward for 20 years. Yet something in him rebelled at the thought of abandoning them to the mercies of a world that had already shown them so little. Gabriel's voice seemed to whisper from the past. "We took an oath, Miles, to all mankind." "No," he said finally, "but you need to be able to protect yourselves. Come with me." He led Naya to the far side of the property where he'd set up targets for shooting practice. From his saddlebag, he retrieved a revolver, smaller than his own but well-maintained. "You know how to use one of these?" he asked, holding out the weapon. Naya eyed it warily. "I have used rifles, not this." "Principles are the same." Miles demonstrated the proper grip, the loading mechanism, the safety. It's about respect for the weapon and steady hands. Nothing more. They spent an hour practicing, Lily joining them after emerging from her hiding place in a storage cellar. Both sisters showed natural aptitude, Naya displaying remarkable precision, Lily a surprising steadiness under pressure. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the dusty yard, Miles found himself actually satisfied with their progress. It had been years since he'd taught anyone anything of value. "Tomorrow we'll practice more," he said, carefully storing the weapons. "You'll need to be comfortable drawing quickly, firing under pressure." "Why are you helping us?" Lily asked suddenly. "Truly?" Miles paused, the question catching him off guard. Why indeed? These women were nothing to him, a complication in an already complex situation. Yet here he was, arming them, training them, offering protection he could ill afford to give. Because the world's full of men who see you as less than human, he answered finally. I've seen where that leads. His hand unconsciously moved to the silver ring hanging from his neck. No one deserves that. That night, Miles dreamed of Gabriel again, but this time the dream shifted. Instead of the familiar nightmare, he saw Gabriel as he'd been in life. Brilliant, compassionate, his hands steady as they worked together in the field hospital. In the dream, Gabriel smiled at him across an operating table, blood-stained but undefeated by the horrors surrounding them. You remember what matters, Dream Gabriel said. That's why I loved you. Miles woke with tears on his face for the first time in years. The following days established a new pattern. Miles spent mornings training the sisters in self-defense, not just with firearms, but hand-to-hand techniques he'd learned during the war. Naya proved a quick study, her movements precise and economical. Lily lacked her sister's natural aggression, but compensated with unexpected resourcefulness. In return, they began sharing their knowledge. Naya taught Miles about desert plants with medicinal properties, showing him how to prepare poultices and tinctures. Lily revealed an artistic talent that extended beyond carving. She could weave baskets so tightly they held water, and craft tools from materials Miles would have discarded. They still maintained certain boundaries. The sisters continued sleeping in the barn, which they had transformed into a surprisingly comfortable living space. Miles kept his journal and private thoughts secured in the cabin. Yet the walls between them gradually thinned. One evening, as they sat around a fire outside the cabin, Lily mentioned their parents, how their father had been a respected medicine man, their mother a storyteller known throughout their tribe. They spoke of a childhood before the violence, of traditions and beliefs that had sustained their people for generations. Miles listened, offering little of himself in return, but the sisters were perceptive. They noted how he sometimes spoke in his sleep, calling out a name. They observed his medical knowledge far beyond frontier first aid. They saw how he touched the silver ring when lost in thought. A week after the confrontation with the ranch hands, Miles received a letter. The postal rider delivered it directly to the cabin, an unusual occurrence that immediately put Miles on alert. The envelope bore no return address, but the handwriting was familiar. Neat, precise script he'd recognize anywhere. Miles waited until he was alone to open it, the sisters having gone to the creek to wash clothes. Inside was a single page, the message brief and unsigned. M, the old colonel, visits your town next month. Not a coincidence. He knows about you, has known for years. This is his trap, not yours. Be careful. I've enclosed what information I could gather. J. A smaller slip of paper contained details of Harrington's planned visit, dates, the size of his security detail, his expected accommodations at Blackwood's hotel. Miles sat heavily in his chair, the letter trembling slightly in his hand. J. James Sullivan, Gabriel's younger brother, the only person who knew the full extent of Miles's quest for justice, the only link to his past life he'd maintained over the decades. If Harrington knew about him, had been tracking him as Miles tracked the colonel, then everything changed. The hunter had become the hunted. Miles burned the letter in the fireplace, watching the paper curl and blacken. 20 years of careful planning, of maintaining his cover as a simple frontier lawman, all potentially compromised. But the revelation also presented an opportunity. Harrington was coming to him, stepping willingly into his territory. One way or another, their long game would end in Broken Mesa. That night, restless with new information, Miles sat on his porch watching the stars. The desert night was cool, a welcome respite from the day's heat. The silver ring rested in his palm, catching occasional glints of moonlight. Soft footsteps alerted him to Naya's approach. She moved with the natural stealth of her people, but made just enough noise to avoid startling him, a courtesy he appreciated. You are troubled, she observed, stopping at the porch steps. Miles closed his hand around the ring. Just thinking. About the one you call for in your dreams? Gabriel? The sound of the name in her voice sent a jolt through him. Miles looked up sharply. You shouldn't listen to a man's nightmares. In my culture, dreams have power, Naya replied, unintimidated. They carry messages from ancestors, warnings from spirits. In mine, they're just the mind clearing out its garbage. Naya studied him in silence, her expression thoughtful. You wear his ring, she said finally. Around your neck, close to your heart. Miles felt exposed, vulnerable in a way he hadn't in years. The urge to retreat behind his walls was powerful, almost overwhelming. Yet something in him had grown tired of silence, of carrying his burden alone. He was a doctor, Miles said, the words emerging rough and unpracticed. We served together during the war. The best man I ever knew. Your brother? Naya asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Miles met her eyes directly. No, not my brother. Understanding passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of a truth that, in this time and place, could get a man killed. Among my people, Naya said after a moment, there are those we call two spirits, born with both male and female souls. They are respected, often become healers or spiritual leaders. Miles gave a bitter laugh. Your people are wiser than mine then. Not wiser, just different. Naya sat on the bottom step, maintaining a respectful distance. How did he die? The question hung in the air between them. For a moment, Miles considered deflection, retreat, but the weight of 20 years of silence suddenly felt too heavy to bear. We were treating wounded from both sides, northern and southern boys, all torn up the same. Gabriel believed our oath as doctors transcended the war. Miles's voice grew distant, lost in memory. Some men didn't like that, saw it as treason. The colonel you call out in your nightmares? Miles nodded. Harrington? Reed Harrington. He had Gabriel executed as a traitor. His hand tightened around the ring. I was forced to watch. Naya's face reflected not pity, but a deep understanding born of her own losses. And you have hunted this man since? 20 years, Miles confirmed. Found most of the men responsible. Harrington's the last. And when you find him, will that heal your spirit? The question struck Miles like a physical blow. He'd never considered it in those terms. Healing had never been the point. Justice had. Or was it vengeance? The distinction had blurred long ago. Nothing will heal what was broken, he replied finally. But he'll answer for what he did. Naya stood, her silhouette graceful against the star-filled sky. We all carry ghosts, Miles Hawkins. The question is whether we let them haunt us or guide us. She turned to leave, then paused. Thank you for your truth. It is a rare gift. As she disappeared into the darkness toward the barn, Miles remained on the porch, the silver ring warm in his palm. For the first time in years, he felt the smallest measure of peace, as if sharing even a fraction of his burden had somehow lightened it. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Miles was checking his ammunition stores when he heard an approaching horse. His hand dropped instinctively to his revolver as he moved to the cabin door. The rider was Micah Jensen, the young telegraph operator from Broken Mesa. Morning, Sheriff, Micah called, reining in his horse. Got an urgent wire for you. He extended a yellow envelope. Came in last night, marked priority. Miles took the telegram, tipping Micah for his trouble. After the young man departed, Miles broke the seal and read the brief message. Harrington arrival moved forward. Stop will reach Broken Mesa in 3 days. Stop, prepare accordingly. Stop, no signature, but Miles didn't need one. James was warning him that the timeline had accelerated. 3 days, barely enough time to finalize his plans. As he tucked the telegram into his pocket, Miles noticed Lily standing in the barn doorway, her expression troubled. Bad news? She asked. Miles hesitated, then decided on a partial truth. Visitor coming to town, someone dangerous. Lily's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. A gesture so brief Miles almost missed it. But his physician's eye, long dormant but never fully extinguished, caught the subtle movement. Realization dawned with stunning clarity. The looseness of her clothing, the morning absences, the careful way she moved. Signs he should have recognized weeks ago. You're with child, he said, not a question but a statement. Lily's eyes widened in alarm, then resignation. She nodded, one hand protectively covering her abdomen. 5 moons now. Miles approached slowly, his medical mind automatically calculating. 5 months. The child would have been conceived shortly before the sisters were captured. Does Naya know? Yes, she has been helping me prepare remedies to keep the sickness away. The father? Lily's eyes filled with tears. My husband. He was killed when we were taken. Miles felt a surge of anger at the casual cruelty of it all. A woman carrying her dead husband's child, treated as property to be gifted to a stranger. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice gentler than usual. "We feared you would send us away," Lily admitted. "A pregnant Apache woman has no place in your world." The truth of her words stung. In Broken Mesa or any frontier town, her options would be grim indeed. "You need proper care," Miles said, the doctor in him temporarily overriding all other concerns. "Proper food, rest." "I am stronger than I look," Lily replied with quiet dignity. "And Naya knows the ways of our people. Women have birthed children in the desert for generations." Miles ran a hand through his graying hair, mind racing with this new complication. A pregnant woman, a vengeful business owner, and a target he'd been hunting for 20 years, all converging in a volatile mix that threatened to explode. "3 days," he said, more to himself than to Lily. "A lot can happen in 3 days." As if to punctuate his words, a low rumble of thunder sounded in the distance. A storm was gathering on the horizon, dark clouds building over the mesas like an omen. Miles looked at Lily, then at the approaching storm, and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The ghosts of his past were closing in, and he wasn't the only one who would face their wrath. The storm hit with biblical fury that night. Rain lashed at the cabin in horizontal sheets, driven by winds that howled like tortured spirits. Lightning split the sky in jagged bursts, illuminating the landscape in stark, momentary tableau before plunging it back into darkness. Miles secured the horses in the barn where Naya and Lily had created a snug living space in one corner. The pregnant woman sat on a makeshift bed of straw covered with blankets, her face drawn with fatigue. Naya worked methodically, sealing gaps in the barn walls with mud and straw to keep out the driving rain. "You should move into the cabin," Miles said, raising his voice over the storm. "Both of you!" The sisters exchanged glances, a silent communication born of a lifetime's bond. "The barn is dry enough," Naya replied, though Miles could see Lily shivering slightly. "Don't be stubborn," he countered. "Lily needs warmth, especially now." He nodded toward her swollen abdomen, acknowledging what was now in the open between them. Reluctantly, the sisters gathered their few belongings. Miles led them through the downpour to the cabin, all three drenched by the time they reached the door. Inside, the stone fireplace radiated welcome heat. Miles added wood to the flames, then retreated to a corner, giving the women space to arrange themselves. It was the first time they had properly entered his private domain, and the tension was palpable. Not fear exactly, but the awareness of boundaries being crossed. "I'll sleep here," Miles indicated a chair near the door. "You take the bed, Lily. Naya can use these blankets by the fire." Naya shook her head. "I will stay with my sister." Miles didn't argue. He watched as the women settled on his narrow bed, Naya positioning herself protectively beside Lily. They spoke quietly in Apache, their voices barely audible above the storm. Unable to sleep, Miles sat in the chair, cleaning his revolver by firelight. His mind raced with plans and contingencies. Harrington's accelerated arrival meant less time to prepare, increased risk. Yet it also suggested an opportunity. Perhaps the governor was traveling with a smaller entourage than originally planned. A particularly loud thunderclap shook the cabin. Lily gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. "She's afraid," Naya explained, noticing Miles's concerned glance. "Our mother was killed during a storm like this. The memory haunts her." "The baby?" Miles asked, his doctor's instincts surfacing. "Move strongly," Naya assured him, "but Lily needs rest she cannot find." Miles hesitated, then moved to his shelf of books. Behind the medical text lay a volume of poetry, Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. The book fell open to a well-worn page, the spine long since broken at this particular passage. "My mother used to read during storms," Miles said, surprising himself with the personal disclosure. Said it gave the mind something to focus on besides fear. He began to read, his deep voice a counterpoint to the storm's fury. The words flowed with surprising ease, as if a part of him had been waiting to speak them aloud again. "This is what you shall do. Love the earth and sun and the animals. Despise riches. Give alms to everyone that asks. Stand up for the stupid and crazy. Devote your income and labor to others. Hate tyrants. Argue not concerning God." Lily's tension visibly eased as he read, her eyes growing heavy with approaching sleep. Naya watched Miles with newfound curiosity, seeing layers to this solitary lawman she hadn't previously glimpsed. Miles read until both sisters had drifted to sleep, their breathing deep and rhythmic. He closed the book gently, the familiar words having stirred memories long suppressed. Gabriel had loved Whitman, had seen in those verses a vision of America worth fighting for, worth healing for. The irony wasn't lost on Miles. He had spent 20 years becoming the antithesis of those ideals, a man consumed by vengeance, measuring his life's worth by the number of men he'd tracked and killed in the name of justice. Yet here he sat, offering shelter to two native women whom society deemed expendable, reading poetry his younger self had once believed in with his whole heart. Perhaps some ember of that idealistic young doctor still glowed beneath the ashes of the man he had become. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the cabin, an uneasy peace had descended. Morning brought clearing skies and an uncomfortable new dynamic. The sisters moved cautiously around the cabin, conscious of occupying Miles's personal space. Miles himself felt exposed, as if the night's small vulnerabilities had revealed too much of the man behind the hardened exterior. After a spare breakfast, Miles outlined his concerns. Blackwood's men will come back, especially with Lily's condition now visible. And there's trouble coming to town. A man I've been hunting. The one who killed your Gabriel, Naya stated simply. Miles's jaw tightened at the directness of her words. Yes, Governor Harrington arrives in 2 days. A governor? Lily looked alarmed. Why would such a man come to a small town like Broken Mesa? Officially to discuss the railroad expansion. In reality, Miles's hand moved unconsciously to the ring at his neck. In reality, I think he's coming for me. Then we should leave, Lily said, one hand protectively on her stomach. Find our people in the mountains. Not an option, Naya countered. You cannot travel far in your condition, not through Apache territory where patrols hunt our people. And winter comes soon to the high country. Miles watched their exchange, struck by the impossible situation. These women had no good choices, a microcosm of the larger injustice that had shaped their lives. Stay here for now, he decided. I need to ride into town, gather information. I'll be back by nightfall. Naya followed him outside as he saddled his horse. Your revenge and our safety may not walk the same path, she said quietly. I know. Miles tightened the saddle cinch with more force than necessary. But sometimes paths cross for a reason. You speak like one who once believed in greater purpose. Miles mounted his horse, looking down at her. The morning light caught the copper undertones in her black hair, the quiet intelligence in her eyes. I stopped believing in purpose when I watched Gabriel die, he said finally. Found vengeance was purpose enough. And when vengeance is complete, Naya asked, what purpose then? The question hung between them, unanswerable. Miles had never allowed himself to think beyond his final confrontation with Harrington. There was only the mission, the hunt, the moment of reckoning he'd rehearsed countless times in his mind. We'll all find out soon enough, he replied, turning his horse toward town. Broken Mesa was unusually active for a weekday morning. Workers were repainting the hotel facade, clearing debris from the main street, and erecting a small wooden platform near the town hall. Preparations for the governor's visit were clearly underway. Miles tied his horse outside the sheriff's office and stepped inside to find his deputy, young Sam Cooper, polishing a rarely used badge. Morning, Sheriff, Sam greeted him nervously. Mr. Blackwood was looking for you. I'm sure he was, Miles replied dryly. Any telegrams come in for me? No, sir, but there was a stranger asking about you yesterday. Well-dressed fellow, not from these parts. Miles's instincts sharpened. Did he give a name? Called himself Sullivan, I think. James Sullivan. Said he was an old friend passing through. James in Broken Mesa. The risk he'd taken by coming in person spoke volumes about the seriousness of the situation. Where's he staying? That's the odd thing, Sam replied, scratching his head. He didn't take a room at the hotel, asked about camping spots outside town. Clever, James was keeping a low profile, avoiding Blackwood's territory at the hotel. If he returns, tell him I'll meet him where we agreed. Miles had no doubt James would understand the reference to their contingency plans, established years ago through coded correspondence. Sure thing, Sheriff. Oh, and Mr. Blackwood wants you at the town council meeting this afternoon about security for the governor's visit. I'll be there. Miles checked his watch. 4 hours until the meeting, enough time to scout the planned route for Harrington's arrival and identify potential vulnerabilities. As he stepped back onto the boardwalk, Miles spotted Blackwood emerging from his trading post, engaged in animated conversation with a stranger. The man was expensively dressed in an Eastern suit that looked out of place in the frontier town, a railroad representative most likely. Miles kept his distance, observing as Blackwood pointed toward various buildings, gesturing expansively, as if the entire town were his personal property to display. The stranger nodded, making occasional notes in a small book. Their business concluded, Blackwood escorted the man to the hotel. As they passed, Miles caught a fragment of their conversation. Assure you, Governor Harrington will be most impressed with the opportunities here. The governor places great trust in your assessment, Mr. Blackwood. Your contributions to his last campaign were most generous. The exchange confirmed Miles's suspicions. Blackwood and Harrington were more than casual acquaintances. They were partners in whatever scheme was unfolding around Broken Mesa. Miles spent the next hours methodically surveying the town, noting changes in security, identifying sight lines and escape routes. His experienced eye cataloged every detail: the newly stationed guards at the hotel, the reinforced locks on the town hall, the unfamiliar faces that suggested Blackwood had brought in additional men. By the time the town council meeting convened, Miles had formulated the beginnings of a plan. Not for protecting Harrington, as was ostensibly his duty, but for creating the opportunity he'd waited 20 years to seize. The meeting took place in Blackwood's office at the back of the trading post, a calculated power move that wasn't lost on Miles. 5 men sat around a polished oak table that seemed absurdly formal in the frontier setting. Blackwood, Mayor Simmons, a weak-willed man who functioned as little more than Blackwood's puppet, Reverend Hollister, who preached submission to authority with greater fervor than he preached the gospel. Or Werner, the town's only physician whose hands shook from his laudanum habit, and Judge Parker, whose justice was available to the highest bidder. Miles took the remaining chair, acutely aware that every man in the room was, to some degree, in Blackwood's pocket. Gentlemen, Blackwood began, his tone suggesting the word was a courtesy rather than an accurate description. Governor Harrington's visit represents an unprecedented opportunity for Broken Mesa. The railroad will bring prosperity beyond our imagining. Murmurs of agreement circled the table. However, Blackwood continued, there are elements who might seek to disrupt this progress. Sheriff Hawkins, your assessment of security threats? Miles met Blackwood's gaze directly. Main concern would be Apache raiding parties. There's been activity in the foothills. This was a calculated lie. Miles knew the local Apache bands had retreated deeper into the mountains months ago, avoiding conflict after brutal army reprisals. Precisely my fear, Blackwood nodded, a little too eagerly, which is why I've taken the liberty of requesting additional security from Fort Williamson. A detachment of cavalry will accompany the governor's party. Soldiers, the complication Miles had hoped to avoid. Military presence would make his task significantly more difficult. That seems excessive, Miles observed. A simple visit hardly warrants army involvement. Governor Harrington's safety is paramount, Judge Parker interjected, especially given the unstable elements in our community. The implication hung in the air. Miles wondered how much these men knew, if Blackwood had shared his suspicions about the Apache sisters, or if Harrington had informed them of his history with Miles. I assume you're referring to the 2 native women currently residing on my property, Miles said flatly. They pose no threat. Blackwood's smile didn't reach his eyes. Perhaps not intentionally, Sheriff, but their presence might inspire sympathy among their kind. We can't risk Apache attacks during such an important visit. The timing is also troubling, Reverend Hollister added. Taking in these women right before the governor's visit raises questions about your loyalties, Sheriff. So that was their angle, painting him as a sympathizer, undermining his position before Harrington arrived. Miles had expected something of the sort. My loyalty is to the law, he replied evenly. Nothing more, nothing less. As it should be, Blackwood said smoothly, which is why I'm sure you'll agree with our decision to temporarily confine these women for the duration of the governor's visit. For their own protection, of course. Miles felt cold anger settle in his chest. That won't be necessary. I'm afraid it's not a request, Sheriff. Judge Parker tapped a document on the table. I've issued the order as a security precaution. The women will be held in the town jail until the governor departs. On what grounds? Miles demanded, though he knew legal niceties were meaningless in this corrupt assembly. Suspicion of espionage, Blackwood replied. We have reports they were communicating with hostiles. That's a lie, and you know it. Nevertheless, the order stands. Mayor Simmons finally spoke, his voice reedy with nervousness. You will bring these women in by tomorrow noon, or your deputies will be sent to collect them. The threat was clear. Miles could comply, or he could face removal from office, possibly arrest himself if they decided to fabricate charges. Is that all? Miles asked, his voice deadly calm. One more item, Blackwood said. During the governor's visit, Deputy Cooper will serve as primary security liaison. You, Sheriff, will maintain your regular patrol duties outside of town. They were sidelining him, ensuring he wouldn't be close to Harrington during the official events. It was both a complication and potentially an advantage. If they expected him to be elsewhere, his actual movements might go unnoticed. Fine, Miles agreed, surprising them with his lack of resistance. If that's all, gentlemen, I have duties to attend to. He left without waiting for a formal dismissal, his mind already calculating the adjustments to his plans. The council's machinations had actually clarified his course of action. He would not bring Naya and Lily to town. Instead, he needed to get them to safety before confronting Harrington. Outside, the afternoon sun beat down on Broken Mesa, the storm's passage leaving the air unusually humid. Miles walked toward the livery stable, intending to check on his horse before departing. A slight movement in the alley between buildings caught his attention, a deliberate shifting of shadow that most would have missed. Miles continued walking naturally but angled toward the alley, one hand casually near his holstered revolver. You've gotten slow, old friend, came a quiet voice as Miles passed the alley's entrance. I could have put a knife in your back 3 times over. You could have tried, Miles replied without turning his head. Chapel ruins, half an hour, don't be followed. He continued on without waiting for acknowledgement, knowing James Sullivan would understand. The abandoned mission chapel stood a mile outside town, a relic from early Spanish attempts to convert the local tribes, now little more than crumbling adobe walls reclaimed by the desert. 30 minutes later, Miles approached the ruins cautiously, scanning for any sign of surveillance. The chapel stood on a small rise, offering clear visibility of the surrounding terrain, one of the reasons he'd chosen it as a meeting point in their contingency planning. James waited inside what had once been the sanctuary, seated on a fallen beam. 20 years had transformed the young man Miles remembered into a distinguished middle-aged gentleman, his once dark hair now salted with gray, his face weathered by experience. Yet Gabriel's eyes looked out from his brother's face, the same intelligence, the same quiet intensity. You look terrible, Miles, James greeted him with a faint smile. You look like a banker, Miles returned, clasping the offered hand firmly. Publisher, actually. I own a small newspaper in San Francisco now. James studied Miles's face. The years haven't been kind to you. I haven't asked them to be. They stood in silence for a moment, 2 men connected by shared loss and the ghost of a third who hovered between them. Harrington knows you're here, James said finally, getting to business. Has known for at least a year. Why wait so long to make his move? Politics. He's positioning for a Senate run, possibly higher. Needs the railroad deal to secure financial backing. Well, James reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded paper. This is a list of his security detail, names, backgrounds. 3 are former soldiers from his command during the war, loyal to him personally. Miles took the paper, scanning the information with a professional eye. How'd you get this? I have sources in his office. His secretary's son was one of the men you and Gabriel saved at Antietam. The family remembers its debts. Harrington's traveling with cavalry? James nodded grimly. 12 men from Fort Williamson, plus his personal guards. He's taking no chances. Neither am I, Miles replied, tucking the paper into his shirt. I need to get 2 women to safety before he arrives. James raised an eyebrow questioningly. Apache sisters. One's pregnant. They've been staying at my place. Your capacity to complicate an already impossible situation remains undiminished, James observed dryly. You know there's a standing bounty on Apache fugitives? They're not fugitives. They were being sold as slaves. I cut them loose. James sighed, rubbing his temple. Of course you did. Gabriel would have done the same. He thought for a moment. I can help get them out. I have a wagon, supplies, know some people in the north who run a sanctuary for native families displaced by the wars. They won't go willingly, Miles warned, especially with Harrington so close. They know what he means to me. What exactly have you told them? Enough. Miles turned away, gazing out through a gap in the adobe wall at the desert beyond. The older one, Naya, she's perceptive, sees more than most. You've grown attached, James noted, surprise evident in his voice. I didn't think that was possible anymore. Miles didn't answer directly. They deserve better than getting caught in my war with Harrington. It was never just your war, Miles. James's voice hardened. Gabriel was my brother. Every day for 20 years, I've thought about what they did to him. Miles turned back, seeing the pain etched in the lines around James's eyes. I know, but this part, this ending, it has to be me. I made a promise. James nodded slowly. We'll get the women to safety first. Then we deal with Harrington. They finalized plans, speaking in the shorthand of men who had collaborated from a distance for decades. James would bring his wagon to Miles's cabin at dawn. They would escort Naya and Lily north to a Quaker settlement that had established a reputation for sheltering native refugees. Once the women were secure, Miles would return for his reckoning with Harrington. As they prepared to part ways, James placed a hand on Miles's shoulder. Gabriel wouldn't want this, you know. The man you've become, the lives you've taken. Gabriel's not here, Miles replied, his voice flat. That's the point. He believed in healing, not vengeance. Then he believed wrong. Miles shrugged off James's hand. The world doesn't work that way. Perhaps not, James conceded, but we can choose which parts of the world we carry inside us. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. A pocket watch Miles recognized immediately. He wanted you to have this. I've kept it all these years, waiting for the right moment. Miles took the watch with unsteady hands. It had been Gabriel's prized possession, a gift from his father upon completing medical school. The gold case was worn smooth from years of handling. The inscription inside faded but still legible. To heal is to honor God's greatest gift. Why now? Miles asked, his throat tight with unexpected emotion. Because whatever happens with Harrington, this chapter of your life is ending. James's eyes held a gentle understanding that was almost unbearable. You'll need something to carry into whatever comes next. Miles slipped the watch into his pocket without response. The weight of it felt simultaneously foreign and familiar, a piece of the past suddenly made present. They parted with brief farewells, Miles returning to his horse for the ride back to the cabin. The afternoon was waning, the sun beginning its descent behind the western mesas. Shadows stretched long across the landscape, like fingers reaching from the past toward the present. At the cabin, Miles found Naya standing guard on the porch, the revolver he'd given her held with competent ease. Her posture relaxed slightly at his approach, but her expression remained vigilant. Trouble in town? She asked as he dismounted. Always. Miles secured his horse, taking longer than necessary with the simple task. Blackwood and his counsel want you and Lily brought in. Claim you're a security risk for the governor's visit. And you agreed? Her voice held no accusation, merely a request for clarity. No. Miles faced her directly. You and Lily are leaving tomorrow at dawn. A friend is bringing a wagon. He'll take you north, to people who can help. Naya's eyes narrowed. Without you? I have unfinished business with Harrington. Your revenge. She made it a statement, not a question. Justice, Miles corrected, though the distinction felt increasingly meaningless. 20 years coming. And if we choose not to go, it's not a choice. Blackwood will send men for you by noon tomorrow. Lily can't run in her condition, and you can't fight off a dozen armed deputies. Naya studied him with unsettling perception. This plan to send us away, it protects your revenge as much as it protects us. Miles couldn't deny it. With Naya and Lily safely distant, he could focus entirely on Harrington without the complication of their safety. Yet his concern for them was also genuine, a surprising development he was still reconciling with his self-image as a man beyond ordinary human attachments. Does it matter why, if the result keeps you both safe? It matters, Naya replied simply, but I will speak with Lily. Inside, they found Lily resting on the bed, one hand absently stroking her swollen belly. The pregnancy had become more visibly pronounced in recent days, as if the child sensed the approaching deadline and was making its presence known with greater urgency. Naya explained the situation in Apache, their musical language flowing between them in a private current. Miles caught the word Harrington repeated several times, and his own name interspersed throughout. When they finished, Lily looked at him with steady eyes. Naya says your friend will help us reach safety. Yes, James Sullivan. His brother was... Miles hesitated, the words still difficult after so many years. His brother was Gabriel. Understanding dawned on Lily's face. The one you loved. The one this governor killed. Miles nodded, unexpectedly moved by the simple acknowledgement of a truth he'd spent decades concealing. We will go with him, Lily decided. But first, you must tell us everything about Harrington, about your plan. We deserve to know the full truth of what we're fleeing. It was a reasonable request, yet Miles found himself resistant. The details of his vendetta against Harrington had been kept close for 20 years, shared only with James in carefully coded correspondence. Please, Lily added softly, trust works both ways. That simple truth broke through his hesitation. These women had trusted him with their lives, their safety, their future. He owed them the same openness in return. Miles sat at the table, removing his hat and running a hand through his graying hair. It was 1865, near the war's end, he began, his voice low and measured. Gabriel and I were Army surgeons, treating wounded from both sides at a field hospital in Virginia. The story emerged haltingly at first, then with increasing fluency as memories long suppressed were given voice. Miles described meeting Gabriel during medical training, their gradual recognition of shared feelings that society condemned. He spoke of their work during the war, their private oath to treat all wounded as simply men in need, regardless of uniform color. Colonel Reed Harrington commanded the regiment our field hospital was attached to, Miles continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. He was ambitious, saw the war as his path to political power, didn't appreciate that we were treating Confederate wounded alongside Union soldiers. Miles described the night Harrington's men had dragged Gabriel from the hospital tent, accusing him of treason for providing medicine to captured Confederate officers. How Harrington had ordered a summary execution to set an example. I tried to intervene, Miles's hands clenched on the table. They beat me, forced me to watch as they shot him. Harrington said it would be a lesson in proper loyalty. The cabin had grown dark as he spoke, the story unfolding in lengthening shadows. Naya lit a lamp, its warm glow creating a small circle of light around the table where past horrors were being exhumed. Afterward, they expected me to continue my duties, act as if nothing had happened. Miles's voice had become distant, detached. I did, for a time, treated their wounded, followed orders, waited for my chance. Your chance for what? Lily asked softly. To begin hunting them, one by one, the men who held me down, the soldier who fired the shot, the officer who gave the order, and finally, Harrington himself. The sisters exchanged glances, absorbing the implication of his words. You have killed these men, Naya stated. Not a question, but a recognition of the darkness that had driven him for decades. All but Harrington. Miles met her eyes without shame or apology. 19 years of tracking them across territories, states. Some died quickly. Others had time to recognize me, to understand why. Silence fell in the cabin. Miles waited for judgment, for fear, for the revulsion his confession might reasonably provoke. Instead, Lily reached across the table and placed her hand on his. In our tradition, blood calls for blood, she said simply. A life taken must be answered for. But our tradition also teaches that vengeance consumes the vessel that carries it, Naya added. The spirit must be cleansed afterward, or it remains poisoned. Miles had never considered what would come after his revenge was complete. The future beyond Harrington's death was a void he'd refused to contemplate. One problem at a time, he said, withdrawing his hand from Lily's gentle touch. First, we get you both to safety. James will arrive at dawn. That night, Miles slept in the chair by the door, as had become their arrangement since the sisters moved into the cabin. His sleep was fitful, broken by familiar nightmares and new anxieties. He dreamed of Gabriel, not dying this time but standing in judgment, his kind face sorrowful as he surveyed what Miles had become. In the dream, Gabriel held out his hands, surgeon's hands, healer's hands, and asked, "Was this worth the price of your soul?" Miles woke before dawn, Gabriel's question echoing in his mind. The cabin was quiet, the sisters still sleeping peacefully on his narrow bed. He moved silently to the window, watching as the first hint of light appeared on the eastern horizon. A new day, perhaps one of his last. The distant sound of wagon wheels broke the pre-dawn silence. Miles tensed, hand moving to his revolver. It was too early for James to arrive, which meant unknown visitors. He slipped outside, positioning himself behind the corner of the cabin with a clear view of the approaching trail. The wagon came slowly into view, a farm wagon rather than a passenger vehicle, driven by a figure Miles recognized with both relief and concern. James Sullivan sat on the driver's bench, but he wasn't alone. Beside him sat a Native American man of perhaps 60 years, his face deeply lined, his long gray hair braided traditionally. In the wagon bed, two younger Native men sat alert, rifles across their knees. Miles stepped into view, keeping his hand near his weapon. "You're early," he called to James. "Had to change plans," James replied, reining the horses to a stop. Blackwood's men were watching the trails. We took a detour through Apache Pass. The older Native man studied Miles with piercing eyes. "This is the one?" he asked James. "This is him," James confirmed. "Miles Hawkins, meet John Eagle Speaker. He's a scout for the Army, unofficially. His sons, Daniel and Thomas." Miles nodded cautiously to the men. "Didn't expect company." "Eagle Speaker knows safe paths through the territories," James explained, climbing down from the wagon. "And his sons are handy in a fight. Should have come to that." "How did he know to find you?" Miles asked, skepticism evident in his tone. James smiled slightly. "Eagle Speaker is known among several tribes as a seer, a man who can read signs others miss. He knew about the daughters of Whitehawk returning before I mentioned them. Said the spirits showed him their faces in a vision." Miles raised an eyebrow, but kept his doubts to himself. Whatever the explanation, Eagle Speaker's arrival was fortuitous timing. "It will come to that," the older man stated matter-of-factly. "Blackwood's riders are already searching the North Trail. We passed them in the night." Miles processed this information quickly. "They're moving earlier than planned. Must have decided not to wait for my cooperation." "Doesn't change anything," James said. "We need to move now. Where are the women?" As if summoned by the question, the cabin door opened. Naya appeared first, a rifle in her hands, her posture alert but not threatening. Lily followed, one hand supporting her swollen abdomen. Eagle Speaker straightened at the sight of them, speaking rapidly in Apache. Naya replied, surprise evident in her voice. "You know each other?" Miles asked. "He knows our father," Lily explained, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Our tribes were allies before the wars." Eagle Speaker turned to Miles. "These women are the daughters of Whitehawk, a great medicine man. Their people believe them dead." "Their people still exist?" "I thought—" Miles stopped, realizing his assumption had been based on the sisters' isolation. "A small band survives in the high mountains," Eagle Speaker confirmed. "Hidden from army patrols, from settlers. They keep the old ways." Hope transformed Lily's face, making her appear years younger despite her advanced pregnancy. "Our people live? You can take us to them?" Eagle Speaker nodded solemnly. "It is why I have come. The signs told of your return." Miles felt a complex emotion he couldn't immediately identify. Relief, certainly, that the sisters would be reunited with their people rather than forced to live among strangers in a northern settlement, but also a curious hollowness, as if something he hadn't known he valued was being taken away. "We must hurry," James interrupted. Practical as always. Blackwood's men could arrive any moment. The next minutes passed in a flurry of efficient activity. The sisters gathered their few belongings while Miles collected essential supplies. Ammunition, food, medical items he thought Lily might need. James and Eagle Speaker's sons prepared the wagon, arranging blankets to create a comfortable space for the pregnant woman. As they worked, Miles briefed James on the accelerated timeline. I'll return to town after seeing them safely away. Harrington arrives tomorrow. I need to be in position before then. We stick to the plan, James agreed. I'll handle my part. Their plan was simple but required precise timing. James would create a diversion during the governor's welcome ceremony. Nothing dangerous, but significant enough to draw attention. Miles, positioned where he'd have a clear shot, would use the distraction to eliminate Harrington. In the ensuing chaos, he would escape via a route they'd established years ago, with James meeting him at a predetermined location. Justice, finally served after 20 years of waiting. Yet as Miles watched Naya and Lily prepare to leave, he felt an unexpected hesitation. The certainty that had driven him for decades seemed suddenly less absolute, the righteousness of his cause less clear. Gabriel's watch weighed heavy in his pocket, its presence a silent challenge to the path he'd chosen. Lily approached as he stood lost in thought. "We are ready," she said, her voice gentle. Miles nodded, unable to find appropriate words for a farewell he hadn't anticipated would affect him so deeply. "I have something for you," Lily continued, holding out a small wooden carving, a bird in flight, similar to the one she'd given him earlier, but more intricately detailed. "My people believe the sparrow carries messages between worlds. It will keep your Gabriel's spirited close to you." Miles took the carving, his throat tight with emotion he didn't dare express. "Thank you. Naya has something also, I think." Lily's smile held a knowing quality as she moved back toward the wagon. Naya approached, carrying a small leather pouch. "Medicine," she explained, offering it to him. "For after, when the killing is done." She met his eyes directly. "For the poison in your spirit." Miles accepted the pouch, understanding its significance even as he doubted its efficacy for wounds as deep as his. "I'm beyond healing," he said quietly. "No one is beyond healing who still draws breath," Naya replied. "You cut our ropes when others would have tightened them. That was the healer in you, not the killer." Before Miles could respond, a distant sound caught his attention. Horses approaching at speed from the direction of town. "Riders coming," he warned, instantly alert. "At least 4, moving fast." James and Eagle Speaker's sons took up defensive positions, rifles ready. Eagle Speaker helped Lily into the wagon, speaking reassuringly in Apache. "Go," Miles ordered Naya, "now. Take the western trail through the ravine. It will slow pursuers." Naya hesitated, her dark eyes searching his face as if memorizing its contours. "The healer still lives inside you, Miles Hawkins. Remember that when you face your enemy." With that, she turned and moved quickly to the wagon, climbing up beside Lily. James took the reins, nodding once to Miles in silent communication, a promise to keep the women safe, to meet as planned after Harrington was dealt with. Eagle Speaker spoke briefly to his sons, who took positions on either side of the wagon, rifles at the ready. The old man turned to Miles. "The path of revenge circles back upon itself, white man. Take care it does not lead you back to where you began." With that cryptic warning, he joined his sons, and the wagon lurched forward, taking the western trail as Miles had directed. Within moments, they had disappeared into the ravine, the sound of their passage swallowed by the morning stillness. Miles turned toward the approaching riders, drawing his revolver and checking the chamber with practiced precision. Whatever came next, the sisters were safely away. One burden lifted, another remaining. Harrington would arrive tomorrow. After 20 years, their long-delayed reckoning was finally at hand. The riders crested the rise leading to his cabin, 4 men, as he'd estimated. Miles recognized Blackwood's foreman in the lead, with 3 ranch hands following close behind. All were armed, rifles in saddle scabbards, revolvers at their hips. Miles stood in plain sight on his porch, making no effort to conceal himself or his drawn weapon. The message was clear: approach at your own risk. The riders slowed, stopping at a cautious distance. The foreman, a hard-faced man named Curtis, called out, "Sheriff Hawkins, we've come for the Apache women by order of Judge Parker." "You're too late," Miles replied evenly. "They're gone." Curtis's face darkened with anger. "Gone where?" "Beyond your reach," Miles stated flatly. "Ride back to Blackwood. Tell him he's lost this particular game." The men exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for this development. Curtis leaned forward in his saddle. "The judge's order was clear, Sheriff. Those women are to be detained until the governor's visit concludes." The judge has no jurisdiction over free people traveling lawfully. Miles kept his revolver visible but pointed downward, a warning rather than an immediate threat. Now get off my property. Curtis signaled to the other riders, who spread out slightly, a flanking maneuver that telegraphed hostile intent. We're authorized to search the premises, Curtis announced, his hand drifting toward his holstered weapon. If you're harboring fugitives, they're not fugitives, Miles cut him off, and you're not searching anything. Last warning, Curtis, right away. For a tense moment, Miles thought the man would force a confrontation. 20 years ago, he might have welcomed it, a chance to express the rage that constantly simmered beneath his controlled exterior. Now, with Harrington so close, unnecessary violence would only complicate his plans. Perhaps Curtis sensed the deadly calculation in Miles's eyes. The difference between a man who carried a gun as a tool of office and one who had used it repeatedly for a singular purpose. Whatever the reason, the foreman ultimately chose discretion. "This isn't over, Hawkins," he spat, reining his horse around. "Blackwood won't forget this. Neither will the judge." "Give them my regards," Miles replied without emotion. The riders departed, dust rising from their horses' hooves as they galloped back toward town. Miles watched until they disappeared from view, then holstered his weapon with a weary sigh. The confrontation had been brief but illuminating. Blackwood was moving aggressively, which suggested increased pressure from above, from Harrington himself most likely. The governor was consolidating his position, eliminating potential complications before his arrival. Miles entered the cabin, now strangely empty, without the sisters' presence. Their brief residence had changed the space in subtle ways. A basket Lily had woven sat near the fireplace. Herbs Naya had collected hung drying from a roof beam. The faint scent of the pine needle tea they favored lingered in the air. He gathered what he would need for tomorrow's mission: extra ammunition, a spyglass for observation, dried food that required no cooking. His movements were efficient, practiced, the routine of a man who had prepared for operations many times before. Yet something felt different. The hollow space in his chest, where determination had burned for 20 years, now contained an unexpected complication. Images of Naya and Lily intruded on his methodical planning, their dignity in captivity, their resilience in freedom, their acceptance of a man whose soul had been twisted by hatred. Gabriel's watch seemed to pulse against his leg, a talisman connecting past and present. Miles withdrew it, opening the case to reveal the inscription he'd read countless times in his memories, but hadn't seen with his physical eyes since the day Gabriel was taken from him. "To heal is to honor God's greatest gift." The words mocked him, a reminder of oaths broken and purposes abandoned. Yet they also stirred something long dormant, the idealism of a young doctor who had once believed in his power to mend what was broken, to ease suffering rather than cause it. Miles closed the watch with a decisive snap. Sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford, not with Harrington's arrival imminent. Whatever reckoning awaited his soul would have to wait until after justice was served. He stepped outside as the sun reached its zenith, surveying the empty landscape around his cabin. Tomorrow, one way or another, his 20-year mission would end. Harrington would die, or Miles would in the attempt. What came after was a question he still couldn't answer. But for the first time since watching Gabriel die, Miles found himself considering the possibility of a future beyond vengeance, a future shaped by something other than hatred. It was a disorienting thought, as unwelcome as it was unexpected. Miles pushed it aside, focusing instead on final preparations for the confrontation that would define the remainder of his life, however long or short that might be. Yet as he worked through the afternoon and into evening, the thought persisted, whispering at the edges of his consciousness like a half-remembered dream. What if vengeance wasn't the end of his story, but merely a chapter within it? Dawn broke over Broken Mesa with the cold clarity of destiny fulfilled. Miles Hawkins stood at his cabin window, watching as the first golden light touched the distant mountains. Today, after 20 years of patient hunting, Reed Harrington would die by his hand. He had slept little, spending most of the night cleaning his weapons and reviewing the plan. James would be in position by now, having returned to town after escorting Naya and Lily to Eagle Speaker's people in the high country. The thought of the sisters brought an unexpected pang, a sense of absence he hadn't anticipated feeling. As he packed his final supplies, Miles found the small leather pouch Naya had given him. For after, she had said, when the killing is done, for the poison in your spirit. He hesitated, then tucked it inside his shirt, close to Gabriel's ring. Medicine for after, assuming there would be an after. Miles dressed with methodical care, sturdy boots, dark clothing that wouldn't draw attention, a long coat that concealed his revolver. Around his neck hung Gabriel's ring, and in his pocket rested Gabriel's watch, talismans connecting him to the purpose that had defined his existence for 2 decades. His final preparation was to remove his sheriff's badge, studying it in his palm for a long moment before placing it on the table. After today, Miles Hawkins the lawman would cease to exist. In his place would emerge a ghost, a man with no identity beyond the completed act of vengeance, or perhaps no man at all. Miles harbored no illusions about his chances of survival. Harrington was protected, powerful, surrounded by loyal men. The likelihood of Miles walking away from this confrontation was slim, yet that had never been the point. Justice for Gabriel, that was all that mattered at the time. The plan was precise in its simplicity. Harrington's welcome ceremony would take place at noon on the newly constructed platform near the town hall. James would create a distraction, a small fire in an abandoned shed near the hotel, drawing attention and potentially thinning the security surrounding the governor. Miles, positioned in the upper room of the livery stable across from the platform, would have a clear shot when Harrington stepped forward to address the crowd. One bullet. 20 years of preparation distilled into a single moment of justice. As Miles mounted his horse, he cast a final glance at the cabin. For a brief time, it had felt like something more than a shelter, almost like a home with Naya's quiet strength and Lily's gentle presence. That feeling was gone now, replaced by the familiar hollowness of purpose that had sustained him for 20 years. He rode toward town, taking a circuitous route to avoid potential observers. Blackwood's men would be watching the main trails, but Miles knew paths through the desert visible only to those who had spent years studying its secrets. Miles approached Broken Mesa from the east, leaving his horse hidden in a small arroyo a quarter-mile from town. From there, he proceeded on foot, moving through the shadows of early morning with the silent precision of a predator. The town buzzed with unusual activity despite the early hour. Workers made final preparations for the governor's arrival, hanging bunting from the hotel balcony and sweeping the main street clean of dust. Blackwood stood on the hotel porch, barking orders with the self-importance of a man celebrating his own ascension. Miles paused in the shadows of an abandoned storefront, observing the security arrangements. Cavalry soldiers patrolled in pairs, rifles at the ready. Plainclothes guards, recognizable by their watchful eyes and the slight bulge of concealed weapons, positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the square. This would be more difficult than anticipated. Miles adjusted his mental calculations, searching for gaps in the security net. If necessary, he would abandon the long-range shot in favor of close-quarter combat, more dangerous but potentially more certain. While observing, Miles caught sight of a figure moving methodically through the crowd. A man in his 60s, Native American with long gray braids beneath a battered hat. Eagle Speaker. What was he doing here? The old man had supposedly taken Naya and Lily deep into Apache territory, far from Broken Mesa. Miles watched as Eagle Speaker paused near a group of townsfolk, seemingly listening to their conversation. No one paid him particular attention, just another native tracker employed by a local ranch. But Miles recognized the deliberate way the old man scanned his surroundings, gathering information with experienced precision. Before Miles could consider the implications, Eagle Speaker slipped away, disappearing down an alley. Miles made a mental note to tell James, then continued his approach to the livery stable. He moved through back alleys, careful to avoid the attention of townspeople who might question why their sheriff approached so furtively. His position had been prepared days earlier, a small window in the hayloft overlooking the town square, offering an unobstructed view of the platform where Harrington would stand. The distance was approximately 70 yards, a challenging shot for most, but well within Miles's capabilities. As he settled into position, Miles caught sight of a familiar figure moving purposefully toward the telegraph office. James Sullivan, dressed as a traveling businessman, his presence in town unremarkable amid the influx of visitors for the governor's arrival. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, a moment of silent acknowledgement. James gave an almost imperceptible nod, before disappearing into the telegraph office. All was proceeding according to plan. Miles arranged his equipment with practiced efficiency. Spyglass for observation, ammunition within easy reach, a canteen of water for the hours of waiting ahead. Then he settled into the stillness that had become his natural state during years of tracking and hunting. A predator's patience, conserving energy until the moment to strike. Through the spyglass, he observed the town's transformation. Blackwood had spared no expense in creating an impressive tableau for Harrington's visit. The platform was draped with American flags, chairs arranged for dignitaries, space cleared for the town band to perform patriotic tunes. The underlying message was clear. Broken Mesa represented civilized progress pushing into the wilderness, taming what was savage, replacing the old with the new. The irony wasn't lost on Miles. His personal mission, a primitive blood vendetta more aligned with the tribal justice Blackwood and his kind derided, would unfold amidst this celebration of civilization. As the morning progressed, townsfolk began gathering in the square, dressed in their Sunday best despite it being a weekday. Children ran excitedly between adults, their high voices carrying on the clear desert air. Merchants had set up impromptu stalls selling refreshments, creating a carnival atmosphere that stood in stark contrast to the deadly purpose that had brought Miles to his hidden perch. Around 10 o'clock, a commotion at the edge of town signaled the governor's approach. Miles raised his spyglass, focusing on the procession entering Broken Mesa from the southern road. A cavalry detachment rode at the front, 12 soldiers in pristine uniforms, rifles gleaming in the sun. Behind them came 3 carriages, the middle one more ornate than the others, undoubtedly carrying Harrington himself. Miles's heart rate accelerated slightly, then steadied as years of discipline asserted control. He focused the spyglass on the middle carriage, waiting for his first glimpse of the man he'd pursued across half a continent. The carriages pulled to a stop before the hotel where Blackwood waited with the town council to greet their distinguished guest. The cavalry formed a protective perimeter as a uniformed driver opened the middle carriage's door. And there he was, Reed Harrington, stepping into the Arizona sunlight with the confident bearing of a man accustomed to power. 20 years had transformed the Colonel Miles remembered into an elder statesman. Harrington's once dark hair had gone completely white, and his military posture had softened somewhat with age. Yet the essential character remained unchanged. The calculating eyes, the mouth set in a perpetual expression of mild disdain, the hand that rested casually near where a sidearm would have been during his military days. Miles's finger twitched reflexively toward the trigger of his rifle, then stilled. Not yet. The crowd was too dense, the distance still considerable. Patience had served him for 20 years. It would serve him for 2 more hours. Harrington disappeared into the hotel with Blackwood and the council members, presumably for a private reception before the public ceremony. The townsfolk remained in the square, milling about in anticipation of the noon event. Miles used the interlude to study the security of arrangements. The cavalry maintained positions around the hotel and near the platform. He identified 3 men in civilian clothing who moved with military precision, Harrington's personal guards most likely. James's intelligence had been accurate, as always. As noon approached, Miles noticed another familiar figure moving through the crowd, Naya. Her appearance sent a jolt of alarm through him. She wore a simple dress like those favored by native women who worked in town, her hair covered with a shawl, but Miles recognized her instantly. What was she doing here? She should be miles away, safe with her people in the mountains. Miles scanned the crowd for Lily, but saw no sign of the younger sister. He hoped she, at least, had remained with Eagle Speaker's people, safe from whatever was about to unfold. Naya moved with purpose toward the back of the hotel, exchanging brief words with a kitchen worker before disappearing through a service entrance. Miles felt a surge of concern. Whatever she was planning, she was putting herself directly in harm's way, precisely what he had sought to prevent by sending her away. He considered abandoning his position to find her, but the town band had begun playing, signaling the imminent start of the ceremony. Dignitaries emerged from the hotel, processing toward the platform in a display of self-importance. Blackwood led the group, followed by Judge Parker, Mayor Simmons, and other council members. And there, walking at the center of the group with the easy confidence of a predator among prey, was Governor Reed Harrington. Miles tracked him through the scope, his breathing slowing automatically as years of preparation narrowed to this moment. Harrington mounted the steps to the platform, shaking hands with local officials, smiling for the assembled crowd. He took his seat center stage as Mayor Simmons approached the podium for introductory remarks. Miles adjusted his aim, calculating for distance, wind, the slight elevation of his position. His finger rested lightly on the trigger, prepared but not yet applying pressure. He would wait for Harrington to stand at the podium, a stationary target fully exposed. The mayor droned on, his reedy voice occasionally carrying to Miles's position on random currents of air. Phrases about progress, civilization, the bright future of Broken Mesa with the coming railroad. Blackwood sat beside Harrington, leaning occasionally to speak in the governor's ear, both men smiling with the private understanding of power, recognizing power. As Miles waited, an unbidden memory surfaced. Gabriel at the field hospital, hands moving with sure precision as he extracted a bullet from a Confederate soldier's chest. "Every life is sacred, Miles," he had said that night, "even those who would deny our humanity." Miles pushed the memory aside. Gabriel's compassion was what had gotten him killed. This world didn't reward mercy. It crushed it. Finally, Mayor Simmons gestured grandly toward Harrington, inviting the governor to address the citizens of Broken Mesa. The crowd applauded enthusiastically as Harrington rose, straightening his jacket as he moved toward the podium. Miles drew a slow breath, held it, and prepared to exhale as he squeezed the trigger. Through the scope, Reed Harrington's features were clear enough to count the lines etching his face, lines earned in a life built upon the suffering of others. In that crystallized moment, as vengeance stood a trigger's pressure away from fulfillment, an unexpected image flashed through Miles's mind. Naya's eyes as she'd offered him the medicine pouch, her quiet certainty that the healer still lived within him despite everything. "For after, when the killing is done, for the poison in your spirit." The hesitation lasted only a fraction of a second, not enough to disrupt Miles's aim, but sufficient to register as an anomaly in 20 years of single-minded purpose. He pushed the intrusive thought aside, refocusing on his target. Harrington reached the podium, arranging papers before him, preparing to speak. Miles's finger tightened incrementally on the trigger. Across the square, the expected diversion manifested, smoke billowing suddenly from the abandoned shed near the hotel, followed by the bright flare of flames. Shouts erupted from the crowd. Several cavalry soldiers broke formation, moving toward the fire. On the platform, heads turned toward the commotion. All except Harrington's. The governor's gaze swept deliberately across the buildings surrounding the square, settling with unerring precision on the livery stable window where Miles was positioned. Their eyes met through the rifle scope, a moment of recognition that sent a cold shock through Miles's body. Harrington's mouth curved in a slight smile, and he gave an almost imperceptible nod, as if acknowledging an expected guest. "He knows I'm here." The realization struck Miles with physical force. This was not just a trap. It was a mutual hunting ground. Predator and prey had reversed roles so many times that the distinction had blurred to meaninglessness. In the chaos erupting around the fire, Miles observed a subtle signal pass between Harrington and his security detail. Three men began moving purposefully toward the livery stable, their hands inside their jackets where weapons undoubtedly waited. The carefully constructed plan was unraveling. Miles had seconds to decide: take the shot now despite the moving target and the approaching threat, or retreat to fight another day. Gabriel's watch seemed to burn against his leg, a physical reminder of the oath that had driven him for 20 years. The ring around his neck felt suddenly heavy, like a noose tightening. Miles adjusted his aim, compensating for Harrington's movement as the governor stepped away from the podium. One shot, even if it was the last action of his life. His finger tightened on the trigger. The livery stable door crashed open below. Heavy footsteps pounded on the wooden stairs leading to the hayloft. Miles had run out of time. With bitter frustration, he abandoned the shot, rapidly disassembling his rifle and stowing it in its case. The approaching men would reach the hayloft within seconds. Miles drew his revolver and moved to a shadowed corner behind stacked hay bales, calculating escape routes and fighting positions. The first man entered the hayloft cautiously, revolver drawn. Miles recognized him from James's intelligence. Thomas Kelly, former cavalry officer, now Harrington's chief of security. The second man followed, moving to the opposite side of the loft in a practiced flanking maneuver. "We know you're here, Hawkins," Kelly called, his voice calm and professional. "The governor would like a word." Miles remained silent, weighing his options. Two men in the loft, likely a third guarding the stairs. Fighting his way out would be difficult, but not impossible. "This doesn't have to end badly," Kelly continued, moving slowly through the hayloft. "The governor has a proposition for you." "I'm not interested in anything Harrington has to say," Miles replied, his voice echoing enough to mask his precise location. "He thought you might feel that way." Kelly gestured to his companion, who moved toward Miles's hiding place. "That's why he sent us with a message. Gabriel Sullivan died a traitor's death. It was quicker than he deserved." White-hot rage exploded through Miles's body. 20 years of controlled fury, carefully channeled into methodical pursuit, erupted in an instant of blind hatred. With a guttural sound more animal than human, he broke from cover, firing at Kelly's companion and striking him in the shoulder. Kelly responded immediately, his revolver tracking toward Miles with professional efficiency. Miles dropped and rolled as Kelly's bullet splintered the wooden beam where his head had been a moment before. Coming up in a crouch, Miles fired twice more, forcing Kelly to dive behind a hay bale for cover. The wounded man had fallen but was still conscious, struggling to bring his weapon to bear with his uninjured arm. Miles kicked the gun from his hand and moved toward the stairs, intent on escape now that Surprise was lost. A shot from below confirmed the presence of the third guard at the stairway. Miles pulled back, reassessing. The hayloft had a loading door that opened to the outside, used for moving hay bales from wagons. It was his only remaining exit. Kelly had recovered his position and was firing methodically through the hay bale barrier, each shot coming closer to Miles's position. Time was running out. With a desperate lunge, Miles reached the loading door and threw it open. 15 feet below was an empty wagon used for transporting hay. Without hesitation, he leapt, twisting in midair to land as safely as possible. The impact drove the breath from his lungs and sent a shock of pain through his left ankle. Miles rolled from the wagon, testing the injured joint. It would bear weight, though running would be painful. Shouts from the livery stable indicated his pursuers were not far behind. Miles limped rapidly toward the nearest alley, aware that the chaos in the town square provided temporary cover for his escape. The fire James had set as a diversion was spreading, drawing more attention and resources away from the governor's ceremony. Miles navigated the back alleys of Broken Mesa with the familiarity of a man who had studied every potential escape route for years. His destination was clear: the chapel ruins where he was to meet James after completing his mission. From there, they would separate, Miles heading south toward Mexico, while James returned to his life in San Francisco. Their connection finally severed after 2 decades of shared purpose. Except the mission wasn't complete. Harrington still lived and now knew definitively that Miles was hunting him. The carefully laid trap had failed in both directions, leaving predator and prey to reset for another encounter. As Miles reached the edge of town, a figure stepped from the shadows of an abandoned shack, causing him to raise his revolver instinctively. "It's me," James said quietly, hands slightly raised. "What happened?" "Harrington knew," Miles replied, lowering his weapon. "He was waiting for the shot, had men in position." James cursed softly. "We need to move. They'll have the town surrounded within the hour." They retreated to where James had left horses hidden in a small grove of cottonwoods near the creek. Miles recounted the confrontation in the hayloft as they mounted, emphasizing Harrington's apparent foreknowledge of the assassination attempt. "He's been tracking me as methodically as I've been tracking him," Miles concluded, adjusting his position to minimize weight on his injured ankle. "This whole visit might have been designed specifically to draw me out. Or to eliminate you," James added grimly. "Either way, we need a new plan." "I saw Naya in town," Miles said, "an Eagle speaker. They should be miles away by now." James's expression darkened. "That complicates things. If Blackwood's men find them, all the more reason to act quickly." Miles nudged his horse forward. "We need to get to them before Harrington does." They rode toward the chapel ruins, maintaining a pace that balanced speed with caution. Miles's mind raced, analyzing the failed attempt and calculating new approaches. The mission remained unchanged. Harrington must die for Gabriel's murder. Only the method needed adjustment. At the ruins, they dismounted and led the horses inside what had once been the sanctuary. The crumbling adobe walls provided some concealment from distant observers, though little real protection if Harrington's men tracked them this far. "You should go," Miles said, checking his ammunition. "No sense in both of us being caught if they've followed." James shook his head. "I've been part of this from the beginning. I'll see it through to the end." "This isn't your fight, James. Never was." "He was my brother," James replied, a rare flash of anger breaking through his usually controlled demeanor. "You don't have exclusive rights to vengeance." Miles didn't argue further. In truth, he welcomed James's presence, not just for the practical assistance, but for the connection to Gabriel, a living reminder of why justice needed to be served. "What's our next move?" James asked, returning to his pragmatic nature. "Harrington will expect me to run," Miles reasoned, "to regroup and try again somewhere else, somewhere beyond his immediate control." A reasonable assumption. So we do the opposite. We go after him tonight at Blackwood's hotel. James stared at him. "That's suicide. The hotel will be guarded like a fortress." "Exactly why he won't expect a direct approach." Miles smiled grimly. 20 years of patience may have made me predictable. Time to change tactics." They spent the next hour developing a plan that balanced audacity with feasibility. James had observed the hotel's layout during his reconnaissance, noting staff entrances and security positions. Miles contributed his knowledge of Broken Mesa's rhythms, when guards would change, which hotel employees might be susceptible to bribery, the location of Harrington's second-floor suite. As they worked, a distant sound caught Miles's attention. Horses approaching from the direction of town, moving at a deliberate pace rather than a gallop. Not an immediate pursuit then, but a systematic search. "Company coming," Miles warned, moving to a position where he could observe through a gap in the adobe wall. 4 riders approached the chapel, led by a figure Miles recognized immediately. Blackwood himself, accompanied by 3 armed men who scanned the terrain with experienced eyes. They were following a trail, his trail, despite the precautions he'd taken. "Blackwood," Miles murmured to James. "How did he find us?" "Someone must have seen us leave town," James replied, checking his revolver. "What's our play?" Miles considered their options. 4 armed men against 2, with limited cover and no easy escape route. Fighting would be risky, potentially fatal. Yet something in Blackwood's approach gave him pause. The businessman was riding slightly ahead of his guards, his posture suggesting confidence rather than caution. It didn't match the behavior of someone hunting dangerous fugitives. "Something's not right," Miles whispered. "He's too casual." As the riders drew closer, Blackwood raised his voice. "Sheriff Hawkins, I know you're there. I've come to talk, not fight." Miles and James exchanged skeptical glances. A trap seemed likely, yet Blackwood's tone lacked the triumph of a man who had his enemy cornered. "Show yourself unarmed," Miles called back. "Your men stay mounted, hands visible." To his surprise, Blackwood complied immediately, dismounting and handing his reins to one of his men. He raised his hands to shoulder height, turning slowly to demonstrate he carried no visible weapons. "Just a conversation, Sheriff. You have my word." "Your word isn't worth the air it takes to speak it," Miles replied, but he stepped into view nonetheless, keeping his revolver trained on Blackwood. James remained hidden, covering Miles from the shadows. Blackwood's expression registered mild affront, but he maintained his conciliatory posture. "Fair enough, but I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. Make it quick. Governor Harrington has proposed a deal." Blackwood took a careful step forward, stopping when Miles raised his revolver slightly. "He knows why you've been hunting him all these years. He's willing to clarify certain historical events in exchange for your cooperation." "Clarify," Miles repeated, the word bitter on his tongue. "You mean lie. Create a story that absolves him of murder." "I mean acknowledge that Dr. Gabriel Sullivan was acting under orders when he treated Confederate wounded." Blackwood's gaze was shrewd, assessing Miles's reaction. "Orders from higher up the chain of command than Colonel Harrington." Miles felt as if the ground had shifted beneath his feet. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the governor is prepared to reveal that Gabriel Sullivan was not a traitor but a patriot, following secret directives from Washington to gather intelligence from captured Confederate officers under the guise of medical treatment." Blackwood smiled thinly. His execution was a regrettable misunderstanding, not a murder. The narrative was so unexpected, so contrary to everything Miles had believed for 20 years, that for a moment he couldn't respond. Gabriel, a spy? Using his medical position to extract information from wounded men who trusted him? It was antithetical to everything Gabriel had stood for. That's a lie, Miles said finally, his voice rough with controlled fury. Gabriel treated enemy wounded because he was a doctor, not a spy, because he believed his oath transcended the war. Perhaps, Blackwood conceded with a casual shrug, but history is written by those who survive to tell it. Governor Harrington is prepared to ensure Gabriel Sullivan is remembered as a hero, not a traitor. His name cleared, his service honored. At what price? Miles demanded, though he already suspected the answer. Your silence, your departure from the territory. And Blackwood hesitated, his expression calculating. Information on the whereabouts of certain Apache fugitives. The governor has a particular interest in natives with specialized knowledge. The final piece clicked into place with sickening clarity. Harrington wasn't just neutralizing a threat. He was hunting the daughters of Whitehawk, the medicine man. Naya's knowledge of traditional healing, Lily's unborn child, potential assets in whatever scheme Harrington and Blackwood were constructing around the railroad's expansion. No deal, Miles stated flatly. Gabriel doesn't need Harrington's lies to clear his name. He wasn't ashamed of what he did. Consider carefully, Sheriff, Blackwood warned. This offer expires when I ride away. The governor's next move won't be nearly so generous. Tell Harrington if he wants to discuss Gabriel Sullivan, he can meet me face to face. Miles kept his revolver steady. Now leave before I decide your presence here violates our agreement to talk peacefully. Blackwood studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if confirming a private assessment. As you wish, but remember, the governor gave you a chance to end this without further bloodshed. He returned to his horse and mounted with deliberate calm. One last thing, Sheriff. The governor mentioned you might be interested to know that Gabriel Sullivan didn't die immediately after being shot. He lingered for several hours, long enough to provide certain confessions. Miles's finger twitched on the trigger, every instinct screaming to end Blackwood's life before he could continue. Only years of hard-earned discipline kept him from firing. He spoke quite eloquently about his relationship with a fellow doctor, Blackwood continued, his tone conversational despite the deadly tension vibrating in the air. Quite shocking revelations, even for wartime. The governor kept notes, I understand. Detailed notes that would make for interesting reading in certain newspapers. Get out, Miles growled, his vision narrowing dangerously. Now. Blackwood smiled, triumph glittering in his eyes. He had achieved what he came for, to unbalance Miles, to introduce doubt and fresh pain into a wound 20 years in the healing. The governor will be at the hotel until tomorrow evening, and he said, turning his horse. Should you reconsider, I'm authorized to broker terms. With that, Blackwood and his men rode away, leaving Miles standing in the ruined chapel, his revolver still raised towards an enemy no longer present. James emerged from the shadows, his face grave. You don't believe that about Gabriel, do you, being a spy? No. Miles holstered his weapon with hands that weren't entirely steady. But Harrington having notes from Gabriel's final hours, that I believe. It's exactly the kind of cruelty he would inflict, forcing confessions from a dying man. The possibility that Gabriel had suffered for hours, alone and in pain, possibly being tortured for information or confessions, added a new dimension to Miles's hatred for Harrington. It was no longer just about justice for a murder. It was about avenging a final desecration of the man he had loved. We stick to the plan, Miles said, his voice hardening with renewed purpose. Tonight, at the hotel. As evening approached, they refined their strategy. The fire James had set as a diversion had caused more damage than intended, destroying several structures near the hotel. The resulting confusion would work to their advantage, creating gaps in security and drawing attention away from their true objective. Their plan was direct. James would create a secondary diversion at the rear of the hotel, while Miles entered through a service entrance identified during their reconnaissance. From there, he would make his way to Harrington's white suite on the second floor. One bullet, fired at close range, no chance of missing, No opportunity for Harrington's guards to intervene. As darkness fell, they prepared to move toward town. Miles checked his weapons one final time, ensuring everything was in perfect working order. James would position himself behind the hotel, timing his diversion to coincide with Miles's entry. If something goes wrong, Miles said as they prepared to mount, don't wait. Head north, find the sisters, make sure they stay hidden. James nodded solemnly. And if it goes right, then Reed Harrington finally answers for his crimes, and 20 years of Ghost can rest. They clasped hands briefly, a gesture that acknowledged the culmination of a shared mission spanning 2 decades. Then they mounted and rode toward Broken Mesa, taking separate trails to avoid detection. The town glowed with lamplight against the desert night, unusually active despite the late hour. The fire's aftermath had disrupted normal routines, with people still clearing debris and securing damaged buildings. Near the hotel, a group of cavalry soldiers maintained a perimeter, alert but not expecting trouble from within the town itself. Miles approached from the east, leaving his horse hidden behind an abandoned cabin at the edge of town. He moved through shadows with practiced silence, Gabriel's watch a tangible weight in his pocket, the ring a constant pressure against his chest, talismans of purpose, carrying him toward the culmination of 20 years' dedication. The hotel's service entrance was guarded by a single soldier, standing at relaxed attention. Miles waited in the darkness of an adjacent alley, watching the guard's patterns, noting when his attention wandered. The young man was clearly bored, shifting his weight from foot to foot, occasionally glancing longingly toward the saloon across the street. Right on schedule, James's diversion manifested, not a fire this time, but the sound of breaking glass and shouted accusations from behind the hotel. The guard's head snapped toward the commotion, his posture tensing as he debated whether to investigate or maintain his position. The decision was made for him when another soldier called for assistance. With a last glance at the service door, the guard moved toward the disturbance, leaving his post temporarily abandoned. Miles seized the opportunity, slipping through the door and into the hotel's kitchen. The space was deserted at this hour, cooking implements hanging in orderly rows, the large stove cold until morning preparations would begin. He moved quickly through to the staff staircase, ascending to the second floor where Harrington's suite was located. The hotel corridor was dimly lit by wall sconces, the carpet absorbing the sound of Miles's careful footsteps. He paused at the corner, checking for guards outside Harrington's door. 2 men stood at attention, revolvers holstered, but clearly visible. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. Miles would have to neutralize both guards quietly enough to avoid alerting others, yet quickly enough to prevent either from raising an alarm. He withdrew a small flask from his coat, whiskey doctored with a potent sedative from his medical supplies. It was a contingency he prepared days ago, though using it would require a performance he wasn't certain he could deliver convincingly. Disheveling his hair and clothing to appear intoxicated, Miles staggered around the corner, weaving slightly as he approached the guards. "Evening, gentlemen," he slurred, the flask held conspicuously. "I seem to have lost my room." The guards tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. "Sir, this area is restricted," the older one stated firmly. "Return to the lobby immediately." "Restricted?" Miles affected exaggerated confusion, moving closer. "But they told me the governor wanted to see me. Something about a railroad investment." The guards exchanged glances, momentarily uncertain. Miles used the hesitation to close the distance, stumbling against the younger guard with apparent drunken clumsiness. "Sorry, son," he mumbled, his hand moving with practiced precision to strike a nerve cluster at the base of the guard's neck, a technique he'd learned from a Chinese doctor during his years of wandering. The young man collapsed without a sound, caught by Miles before he could hit the floor. The older guard reacted instantly, drawing his revolver. Miles was faster, driving his fist into the man's solar plexus with focused force. As the guard doubled over, gasping for breath, Miles delivered a second precise blow to the side of his neck, rendering him unconscious. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds and generated minimal noise. Miles dragged both unconscious men into an adjacent linen closet, binding and gagging them with strips torn from hotel sheets. They would remain undiscovered until morning, long after he had completed his mission and disappeared into the vast Arizona desert. Approaching Harrington's door, Miles drew his revolver and listened intently. No sounds emerged from within the suite. He tested the handle, locked, as expected. From his pocket, Miles withdrew lockpicks he'd carried for 20 years but rarely needed to use. The hotel lock was simple, yielding to his practiced touch within seconds. He eased the door open, revolver raised, prepared for immediate resistance. The suite's sitting room was empty, lit only by moonlight filtering through partially drawn curtains. A door on the far wall presumably led to the bedroom where Harrington would be sleeping, unaware that 2 decades of pursuit had culminated in this moment. Miles moved silently across the sitting room, every sense heightened. The familiar calm of imminent action settled over him, the hunter's focus narrowing to the single point of his target. He reached for the bedroom door handle, turning it with exquisite care to minimize noise. The bedroom beyond was dark, illuminated only by a thin sliver of moonlight between heavy curtains. Miles could make out the shape of a large bed against the far wall, a human form visible beneath the covers. One shot at close range. Quick, silent, definitive. He approached the bed, revolver extended, finger tightening incrementally on the trigger. 20 years of pursuit, of purpose, of pain, all converging on this single moment of justice. Miles reached the bedside, aiming directly at what should have been Harrington's head. "I've been waiting for you to Hawkins," came a calm voice from the corner of the room. Miles whirled, weapon tracking toward the sound. A lamp flared to life, revealing Reed Harrington seated in an armchair, a revolver resting casually on his knee, aimed directly at Miles's chest. "You're becoming predictable in your old age," Harrington observed, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone Miles remembered from 20 years ago. "Though I must admit, I expected you this morning at the ceremony, not tonight. A pleasant surprise to find you're still capable of tactical adjustments." Miles kept his revolver trained on Harrington, mind racing to assess the situation. The man in the bed was clearly a decoy, pillows arranged to create the illusion of a sleeping figure. "No more running, Harrington," Miles stated flatly. "It ends tonight." "Indeed it does," Harrington agreed with unsettling amiability. "Though perhaps not as you envisioned. Please lower your weapon. We both know that if either of us fires, the other will as well. Mutual destruction seems an unsatisfying conclusion to our long association." "Association?" Miles nearly laughed at the absurdity of the term. "You murdered the man I loved. I've spent 20 years hunting you down. That's not an association, it's a reckoning." Harrington studied him with clinical interest. "Is that what you truly believe? That I didn't know about you and Sullivan before that day? That his execution was simply about treating Confederate wounded?" A cold uncertainty crept into Miles's certainty. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying, Dr. Hawkins, that Gabriel Sullivan was marked for elimination the moment I discovered his proclivities. And yours." Harrington's smile was reptilian in the lamplight. "The medical treatment of enemy soldiers was merely a convenient pretext. I couldn't have two deviants serving as surgeons in my command. Bad for morale, bad for discipline." Miles's finger tightened on the trigger, rage threatening to overwhelm 20 years of patient discipline. "Before you pull that trigger," Harrington continued, "consider what you're truly avenging. Is your personal perversion really worth dying for?" "Yes," Miles replied without hesitation. "Because whatever your reason, you murdered an innocent man, a healer, someone who saved lives while you destroyed them." Something shifted in Harrington's expression, a flicker of genuine emotion breaking through the calculated facade. "Saved lives, is that what you think?" He leaned forward, his voice lowering intensely. "Let me tell you what your precious Gabriel was really doing in that field hospital." Harrington's revolver never wavered as he spoke, the words flowing with the force of long-suppressed truth. "3 of my best officers died under Sullivan's care. Men who should have recovered from survivable wounds. Each time Sullivan documented unexpected complications. But I noticed a pattern. These men had all expressed particular disgust regarding certain unnatural behaviors they had observed among the ranks." Miles felt sick, recognizing the implication. "You're suggesting Gabriel deliberately let men die because of their prejudices? That's insane. He was a doctor. He took an oath. An oath he violated selectively, it seems." Harrington's certainty was chilling. "I had the bodies exhumed. Trace amounts of foxglove were found, enough to stop a weakened heart. not enough to be immediately suspicious. Sullivan was poisoning soldiers who threatened his secret. The accusation was so fundamentally contrary to everything Miles knew about Gabriel that it should have been laughable. Yet Harrington's absolute conviction gave him pause. Could there be some truth buried within the lie? Some aspect of Gabriel he had never known? No, Miles said finally, finding certainty again. Gabriel healed. That's who he was. This is just another lie to justify murder. Believe what you must, Harrington replied with a slight shrug. But ask yourself this. In 20 years of pursuing me, did you ever consider why I never had you arrested? Why I allowed your vendetta to continue when I could have ended it at any time? The question caught Miles off guard. It was true, a man of Harrington's resources and connections could easily have had Miles apprehended years ago. Because I recognized a useful tool when I saw one, Harrington continued, answering his own question. Your pursuit eliminated several men who had become inconvenient to me, former subordinates who knew too much, who might have exposed my methods to obtain wartime intelligence. You believed you were hunting Gabriel's killers. In reality, you were cleaning house for me, removing potential threats to my political aspirations. Miles felt as if the floor were tilting beneath him. The possibility that his 20-year quest for justice had been manipulated, that he had been an unwitting assassin serving Harrington's purposes, was almost too monstrous to contemplate. You're lying, he said again, but with less conviction. Am I? Harrington's smile returned. Consider the pattern. Each man you eliminated had connections to my wartime command. Each had shown signs of talking too freely about certain operations. And each time I received reports of their deaths. A wandering doctor identified by description, if not by name, administering a fatal dose of something untraceable before disappearing. The accusation cut deeply because it contained enough truth to be plausible. Miles had indeed used his medical knowledge to ensure each death appeared natural. Heart failure, cerebral hemorrhage, pulmonary embolism. Clean deaths that wouldn't attract attention, that would allow him to continue his mission without becoming the target of a manhunt. Even if that were true, Miles said carefully, it doesn't absolve you of Gabriel's murder. No, it doesn't, Harrington conceded. But it does suggest a certain symmetry to our relationship. You've been serving my purposes while believing you were working against them. An elegant arrangement, wouldn't you agree? Miles's certainty wavered, decades of purpose suddenly undermined by doubt. What if Harrington was telling the truth? What if the men he'd killed had been selected not just for their role in Gabriel's death, but for their potential to threaten Harrington's ambitions? In that moment of hesitation, a shadow moved at the bedroom doorway. Miles registered the movement too late as pain exploded in the back of his head. He staggered, his vision blurring, revolver slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers. As darkness claimed him, the last thing he saw was Harrington rising from the chair, Victoria's smile fading to businesslike efficiency. Secure him, the governor ordered someone Miles couldn't see, and send for Blackwood. We have what we need now. Then consciousness fled entirely, leaving Miles suspended in darkness. Miles awoke to the sound of dripping water. His head throbbed with each pulse of his heart, and his mouth tasted of copper and bile. He tried to move and found his hands bound behind his back, his ankles secured to the chair he sat upon. The room was dark, cool, and damp, a cellar most likely. Blackwood's hotel had extensive storage facilities beneath the main building. He's awake, a voice observed from the shadows. A match flared, illuminating Harrington's face as he lit an oil lamp. The soft golden light revealed a stone-walled cellar lined with wine racks and storage crates. They were alone, no guards visible, though Miles had no doubt they waited just outside the heavy wooden door. Water? Harrington offered, holding a cup to Miles's lips. Miles turned his head away. I'm not interested in your hospitality. As you wish. Harrington set the cup aside and pulled another chair close, sitting with the casual ease of a man who had all the time in the world. We have much to discuss, Hawkins. Your future, specifically. I don't have a future. We both know that. On the contrary, I'm offering you one. Harrington leaned forward, elbows on knees. Your skills are wasted in this pointless vendetta. A surgeon of your caliber would be quite valuable to certain endeavors I'm involved with. I stopped being a doctor the day you murdered Gabriel. And yet here you are still using medical knowledge to kill rather than heal, but the expertise remains. Harrington's eyes gleamed in the lamplight. I've followed your work, Miles. May I call you Miles? 20 years makes for a certain intimacy, doesn't it? Get to the point, Miles growled. The point is simple. I need someone with your unique combination of medical knowledge and moral flexibility. The railroad brings opportunities beyond mere transportation. Opportunities in pharmaceuticals, experimental treatments, testing procedures that might be considered unorthodox in more civilized settings. Miles's disgust must have shown on his face. Don't be so quick to judge, Harrington chided. You've been operating on the fringes of medical ethics for 2 decades. The difference is I'm offering legitimacy, resources, protection. In exchange for what? Experimenting on people? Creating addictions you can profit from? In exchange for putting your talents to use beyond personal revenge. Harrington's voice hardened. Consider your alternatives carefully, Doctor. The other option is considerably less pleasant. Miles laughed, a harsh sound that echoed against the stone walls. You think I care about dying? I've been dead for 20 years. You just haven't put me in the ground yet. Who said anything about killing you? Harrington smiled thinly. There are institutions for the criminally insane where men like you can live for decades. Heavily medicated, of course. Subjected to treatments designed to correct unnatural impulses. Miles fell silent, recognizing the threat for what it was. Not death. That would be too clean, too quick. Instead, a living hell of the kind he'd heard whispered about by other men like himself. Places where electricity and ice baths and surgical interventions were used to cure men of their deviancy. You see now, Harrington nodded, reading his expression. Not a pleasant prospect, especially for a man of your intelligence. Before Miles could respond, the cellar door opened. Blackwood entered, accompanied by 2 guards and, to Miles's shock, Naya. She wore a servant's dress, her hands bound before her, a bruise darkening her left cheek. Her eyes met Miles's, flashing with a fierce determination that belied her captive status. Ah, our other guest of honor, Harrington said, rising to his feet, the daughter of Whitehawk. I understand you possess your father's knowledge of traditional medicine. Naya said nothing, her silence a palpable defiance. Where is her sister? Harrington asked Blackwood. Still searching, Blackwood replied. The pregnant one is valuable, but this one knows more about the medicines. Miles strained against his bonds, rage building at the sight of Naya's bruised face. Let her go. She has nothing to do with this. On the contrary, Harrington countered, she has everything to do with this. Native remedies, when properly extracted and refined, have considerable market value, especially those with mind-altering properties. Miles looked at Naya, understanding dawning. This is what he wants, your people's sacred medicines, turned into products. He will not have them, Naya replied, her first words since entering. Some knowledge is not meant for men like him. Harrington sighed as if disappointed by a child's stubbornness. Everyone has their breaking point, my dear. Even the most stoic native woman. He turned to Blackwood. Take her to the other room. Begin the questioning. I'll join you shortly. As the guards moved to take Naya away, she locked eyes with Miles once more. In that brief moment, something passed between them, a message, a promise. Then she was gone, the door closing heavily behind her. Harrington returned his attention to Miles. Now, where were we? Ah, yes, your future. You have until morning to decide. Cooperation or institutionalization. A simple choice, really. And Naya, what happens to her? That depends entirely on her cooperation. And yours. Harrington moved to the door. I suggest you use the time to consider what remains of your life, Doctor. 20 years of hatred is quite enough, don't you think? Time for something more productive. With that, he departed, leaving Miles alone with the dripping water and the shadows. The lamp's flame flickered, casting grotesque shapes across the stone walls, shapes that seemed to mock his helplessness, his failure. Miles tested his bonds methodically, searching for weakness. The ropes were expertly tied with no slack to exploit. The chair was bolted to the floor, eliminating the possibility of breaking it for weapons or tools. His captors had left nothing to chance. As minutes stretched into hours, Miles's thoughts turned to Gabriel. Not the idealized martyr of his 20-year crusade, but the real man, complex, flawed, human. Had Gabriel truly been capable of the acts Harrington described? Miles couldn't believe it. Yet doubt, once planted, grew like a weed in fertile soil. What did he really know of Gabriel's actions during those chaotic days of the war? They had worked separate shifts sometimes, treated different patients. Could Gabriel have carried out his own private justice against men who threatened them? No. Miles rejected the thought. Gabriel had been a healer to his core. Whatever Harrington claimed, it was merely another manipulation, designed to taint even the memory of the man Miles had loved. A scraping sound at the door interrupted his thoughts. Miles tensed, preparing for Harrington's return. Instead, the door opened just enough to admit a slender figure, James Sullivan, moving with the caution of a man in enemy territory. "James," Miles whispered, relief flooding through him. "How did you—" "No time," James cut him off, kneeling to work on Miles's bonds. "I bribed one of the kitchen staff after I saw them take you. They brought you down here. Eagle Speaker's people created a distraction at the front of the hotel while I slipped in through the service entrance. We have minutes, not hours." "No time," James cut him off, kneeling to work on Miles's bonds. "Eagle Speaker's people created a distraction. Something about a sacred ritual that requires every guard's attention. We have minutes, not hours." As James freed Miles's hands, another figure slipped into the cellar. Lily, her pregnancy even more pronounced than when Miles had last seen her. She carried a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Lily, what are you doing here? You should be with your people." "My sister needs me," she replied simply. "And you saved us. Now we save you." "Naya's being held in another room," Miles explained, as James worked on the ankle restraints. "We need to find her." "Already taken care of," James replied. "Eagle Speaker's sons are freeing her as we speak. We'll meet at the chapel ruins." Once freed, Miles rubbed circulation back into his wrists. "Harrington?" James hesitated. "Still here, heavily guarded." "Then this isn't over," Miles declared, searching the room for weapons. "I can't leave until—" "Until what?" James interrupted sharply. "Until you kill him? Or until he kills you?" "Gabriel wouldn't want this, Miles. You know that." "I don't know anything anymore," Miles admitted, the weight of 20 years suddenly crushing him. "Everything I believed. Harrington says I've been his unwitting assassin all this time, that the men I killed were threats to him, not just Gabriel's murderers." "And you believe him?" James asked incredulously. "The man who executed my brother would say anything to save himself." "I don't know what to believe," Miles replied honestly, "but I can't walk away. Not now, not without finishing this." Lily approached, unwrapping her bundle to reveal a small leather pouch, Naya's medicine. "My sister said you would need this for the poison in your spirit." Miles recognized the pouch he'd carried but left behind when setting out for town. "Medicine can't help me now, Lily." "Not all medicine is for the body," she replied with unexpected wisdom. "Some is for the spirit." She pressed the pouch into his hand. "Choose healing, not more death. That is Naya's message to you." A commotion from above interrupted them. Shouts, running feet. Their distraction was ending. "We need to go," James urged. "Now." Miles hesitated, torn between escape and the completion of his 20-year mission. Harrington was here within reach. One final confrontation, one bullet, and it would be over. Yet Lily's words echoed in his mind, merging with memories of Gabriel, not dying but healing, his hands steady as he worked to save lives that others had deemed expendable. The real Gabriel, not the martyr of Miles's vengeful imagination. Choose healing, not more death. With a deep breath, Miles slipped the medicine pouch into his pocket, feeling it settle alongside Gabriel's watch. "Let's go." They moved silently through the hotel's service corridors, guided by James's meticulous reconnaissance. The distraction had drawn most of the guards outside, leaving their escape route relatively clear. Within minutes, they had reached the stables behind the hotel, where horses waited, saddled and ready. "Eagle Speaker thinks of everything," James observed as they mounted. "Where's Naya?" Miles asked, scanning the darkness. "Already on her way to the meeting point with Eagle Speaker's sons," Lily assured him. "She is safe." They rode through the shadows, avoiding the main streets of Broken Mesa. The town was in turmoil, with guards and townsfolk alike drawn to some spectacle near the town square. Eagle Speaker's sacred ritual, no doubt. As they reached the edge of town, Miles cast one last glance over his shoulder. 20 years of pursuit, ending not with justice served, but with escape. It should have felt like failure. Instead, he experienced an unexpected lightness, as if shedding a burden he'd carried for so long, he'd forgotten its weight. As they rode, Miles looked to Lily. Why did Naya come back? She should have stayed safely with your people. My sister saw it in a dream the night we reached our camp, Lily explained. She woke saying the ancestors showed her that if you faced Harrington alone, death would claim both your body and spirit. The medicine pouch she gave you, it was not meant to wait. Some healing cannot come after vengeance is taken. Lily's eyes were solemn in the moonlight. She came back for you, as you once came for us. Miles rode in silence, absorbing her words. The thought that someone would risk their life for his soul was foreign, unsettling yet strangely warming. The chapel ruins were illuminated by a small fire, carefully positioned to be visible only to those approaching from the eastern trail. Naya stood beside it, her face bruised, but her posture unbowed. Eagle Speaker and his sons maintained a watchful perimeter, rifles at the ready. As Miles dismounted, Naya approached. Without words, she examined his face, reading the conflict in his eyes. You chose to leave him alive, she said finally. I chose to live, Miles corrected her. There's a difference. Yes, she agreed, a very important one. Their moment of understanding was interrupted by James. We need to keep moving. Harrington will have search parties out by dawn. Eagle Speaker joined them, his weathered face grave. We have prepared a path to the high country. The white man's horses cannot follow where we will go. Miles nodded. Thank you, all of you. He turned to James. What will you do? Return to San Francisco, James replied. Continue my work. Live the life Gabriel would have wanted for me. He studied Miles's face. And you? Miles hesitated, the question piercing deeper than expected. For 20 years, his identity had been singular. The Avenger, hunting Gabriel's killer. Without that purpose, who was he? Naya's voice broke the silence. He will come with us, she declared. Our people need a healer. Miles stared at her, stunned by the simple invitation. I haven't been a healer in a very long time. The healer is still within you, she insisted. I have seen him, in how you treated my wound, in how you protected my sister, in how you chose life tonight instead of death. Your people wouldn't accept me, Miles argued. A white man, a killer. My people understand that all spirits can be reborn, Naya countered, even those damaged by hatred. Eagle Speaker nodded agreement. The daughters of White Hawk have chosen. Their wisdom guides our tribe. Miles looked to Lily, who smiled gently, one hand on her swollen belly. My child will need a doctor, she said simply, and I would like that doctor to be you. James clasped Miles's shoulder. Gabriel would approve, he said softly, a chance to heal again, to make peace with the past. Miles felt something stir within him, something long dormant, almost forgotten. The idealistic young doctor who had once believed in Cowboy to mend what was broken, who had taken an oath to do no harm. I don't know if I remember how, he admitted. You will remember, Naya assured him. The hands do not forget what the heart knows. Miles reached into his pocket, feeling the smooth case of Gabriel's watch. He opened it, gazing at the familiar inscription. The words that once had mocked him as a betrayal of his oath now seemed to whisper a different message, not of guilt, but of possibility. For the first time in 20 years, the words didn't mock him. They invited him back to himself, to the man he had been before vengeance consumed him. The decision crystallized with unexpected clarity. Harrington would continue his life of power and corruption, perhaps forever beyond justice for Gabriel's murder. Yet the true victory would not be in killing him, but in reclaiming what Harrington had tried to destroy. Miles's identity as a healer, his capacity for compassion, his future. I'll come, Miles said finally, if your people will have me. Naya's expression softened, a rare smile transforming her features. They will, and in time, you will find what you have been seeking all these years. What's that? Miles asked. Peace, she replied simply, for Gabriel's spirit and for your own. As they mounted to begin the journey to the high country, Miles felt Gabriel's watch against his heart. the medicine pouch beside it. Talismans not of vengeance now, but of healing, for others and perhaps finally for himself. The ghosts that had haunted him for 20 years didn't vanish, but they seemed to recede somewhat, their grip on his soul loosening. There would be difficult days ahead, old habits and hatreds to overcome. Yet for the first time since watching Gabriel die, Miles could envision a future shaped by something other than revenge. Dawn was breaking as they rode into the mountains, the first golden light touching the distant peaks. A new day, perhaps the first of a new life. Behind them, Broken Mesa grew small, then disappeared entirely, along with the man Miles had been for 20 long years. Ahead lay uncertainty, challenge, the daunting prospect of rediscovering the healer buried beneath the Avenger's scar tissue. And for now, that was enough.